Chapter 762. Rip. The servant's clothes suddenly tore, and a hideous and horrible figure, like a monster made of countless sharp blades, rushed to Buckingham. Buckingham's pupils shrank, and the black knife in his hand quickly melted, turning into black mucus covering his whole body. But it would take at least 1 or 2 seconds to enter the demonic body state, so Dean had already rushed out. The head-on flying desk was instantly torn apart, unable to stop Dean's sprint. He almost rushed to Buckingham in an instant. His arms are like knives, sweeping toward Buckingham's chest. At the same time, the blade-like limbs on his back and shoulders surrounded Buckingham and hugged him. "No!" Buckingham roared, and the next moment he was completely hugged by Dean. The roar stopped abruptly. A lot of blood oozed from Dean's blade-like limbs and flowed to the soft carpet under his feet. When Dean loosened his hands, internal organs and limbs were scattered from his arms. The surface of these limbs was still covered with black mucus, looking black. His demonic body had only entered half of the body, and he had died before it was fully formed. Dean glanced at him and found that the black mucus on the surface of his limbs was still crawling slightly, extending in all directions as if it was alive. Some of the black mucus slightly curled up, reaching toward Dean's feet, but only halfway. It gradually stopped flowing, and then completely stopped flowing, returning to dead silence. It was the first time for Dean to see such a situation. His face changed slightly, and there was an inexplicable chill in his heart. For a moment, he even felt that his whole body was surrounded by an unknown monster, and he was hiding in the monster's body. At this time, there was a rush of footsteps outside. Dean came back to his senses and quickly broke the window, rushing to the pioneers in the nearest building. When Dean rushed out of the window, the guards outside were immediately alarmed and quickly gathered. But Dean quickly crawled outside the building's wall, and his blade-like limbs penetrated the wall, firmly sucking his body. After a few jumps, he rushed to another building and broke the wall. Through the heat capture, he saw that the pioneer in this building had noticed the abnormality and rushed to his position. Bang! Dean cut a wall and immediately met the pioneer in the building. It was a handsome young man in casual clothes. When he saw Dean's appearance, he was stunned for a moment. He seemed to be a little shocked, but he quickly reacted. The black fluid penetrated from his skin, covered his whole body, and entered the demon body. When Dean broke the wall, he rushed straight to the pioneer. When he came to the front of the pioneer, the latter had just entered the demon body. The pioneer's demon body looked strange. Its head was elongated like a horse, but the chest was covered with soft silver scales. Its hands were like hooves, and its ears were long like rabbit ears. Dean could see that the appearance was similar to the rare monster Silencer. Silencer was a monster that was good at perception. It was mediocre in combat, but extremely excellent in speed. This could be seen from a young man's demonized hands. When Dean rushed in front of him, the young man seemed to judge the strength gap between the two sides, turned around, and ran. However, although Dean was also a pioneer, his physique was almost at the peak of the wilderness level. Moreover, Splitter was good at speed. Under his sprint, he quickly caught up with Splitter in the narrow corridor. "Go away!" The young man noticed the horrible atmosphere behind him. He turned around angrily and threw out a sharp sword. This sharp sword was clamped by his hoof palms. The shape of the sword hilt seemed to be forged to adapt to his hoof palms. At this moment, the sword was chopped at Dean with great momentum. Dean almost didn't look at it. A sharp blade limb flew out from his back and cut off the sword. At the same time, several other sharp blade limbs rushed out from both sides of his body. Puff! Puff! They pierced the young man's back and came out from his chest. The young man screamed. Dudian didn't wait for him to continue to struggle as he waved his sickle arms and cut off the young man's head. In just a few seconds, a pioneer of the pyramid fell at Dean's feet. Unlike the previous sneak attack, this time it was a head-on battle. It showed how important the gap between magic marks was. Dean didn't stay and continued to rush to another pioneer in the next building. He had seen another pioneer at the peak of the wilderness level was rushing here. He had to kill as many other pioneers as possible before the other one caught up. In this way, he would have a greater chance of winning against the pioneer at the peak of the wilderness level. However, things didn't go as he wished. When Dean rushed to the next building, the pioneer who lived here had escaped into the ground. His heat source was moving quickly hundreds of meters underground. It turned out to be a magic mark that could drill into the ground. Dean had to give up this goal and continue to rush to the last pioneer. This pioneer was on the top floor of an office conference building. When he climbed all the way to the top from outside the wall, all the staff in the building were alarmed. Some gathered at the window and looked up, and some directly fled out of the building. When Dean climbed to the top, he saw a fully armed and ferocious figure standing in a spacious office, looking at him fiercely, but there was a hint of tension in the figure's eyes. Dean had noticed that the pioneer at the peak of the wilderness level had rushed to the bottom of the building. He almost didn't stop and rushed over. Although he couldn't recognize the magic mark of this pioneer, he didn't need to identify it. Bang! The pioneer's body was bent, staring at Dean like a crocodile. When Dean rushed over, he immediately lifted the chair next to him and threw it away. At the same time, he retreated and turned to rush out of the window. The window here was made of glass, so it was broken in an instant. His body fell straight down. Dean didn't stop. He rushed to the broken window, but he didn't jump down. Instead, he stabbed the sharp blade on his back into the ground under his feet and stopped his body instantly. Then he clung to the wall below and crawled like a spider. For him, the speed of falling was slower than the speed of crawling. Moreover, there was another advantage of his demonic body. The sharp blade on his back was equivalent to a few more arms, which made him very flexible in changing directions. The hunchback crocodile, demonic body pioneer, saw Dean climbing the wall and chasing him. The fierce killing intent in the pioneer's eyes suddenly turned into horror. He hurriedly grabbed the wall with his palm, trying to use the force to push himself down. However, it was extremely difficult to move his body in midair. He just watched Dean crawling like a vicious beast. A scream. The sharp blade on Dean's back quickly pierced through the pioneer's body and hooked his body at the same time. Several other sharp blade limbs immediately loosened the wall and quickly pierced in from different directions. Blood sputtered in midair. Dean twisted his back. With a tearing sound, the pioneer's body was instantly torn apart. Guts and intestines fell from midair like hailstones. Some splashed on the windows next to them, which made the people on the nearby floors turn pale and tremble. At this time, Dean's body also fell vertically to the ground. This high-rise building was hundreds of meters high. When his chest landed, there was a heavy feeling of chest tightness, but he was not injured. He immediately climbed up and looked at the heat source rushing from the other side of the building. When the blazing heat source rushed out of the corner, its appearance was also revealed. It was a stone-like monster that was nearly 3 meters tall. It still maintained the outline of a human, but its skin, hair, face, and other parts were all covered by a layer of stone-like cuticle. It held a rough stone sword in its hand. The edge of the sword was sharp, and in the middle was a stone bone. It looked simple and unadorned. Go to hell. Seeing the scattered pieces of corpses under Dean's feet, he roared and rushed at Dean with his sword. Dean didn't move, but the sharp blade limbs on his back slightly twisted. He squinted his eyes and looked at the fast-approaching pioneer. He secretly wondered whether his splitting blade could pierce through the pioneer's body. Judging from its appearance, the latter was obviously a magic mark that was good at defense. But the pioneer was a legendary magic mark of extreme attack. As the distance got closer and closer, Dean's eyes became sharper and sharper. With a swoosh, the stone pioneer roared and slashed at Dean with his sword. The momentum was so great that it seemed to split the whole earth. Dean was surprised and did not dare to meet the attack head-on. His body quickly dodged to the side, and at the same time, the sharp blade limbs on his back pushed his body. It was like several arms controlling the body, and then he pushed hard and shot toward the opponent. Go to hell, the stone pioneer roared. His stone sword slashed on the ground, but it was too late to take it back. He raised his stone fist and smashed toward Dean's head. In Dean's whole body, Only the head had the least carapace, which was the most obvious weakness. Dean tilted his head, and his body folded backward in an incredible posture like a monkey. The sharp blade limbs on his back and shoulders moved quickly, stabbing toward the stone pioneer. When the sharp blade rubbed the opponent's body, Dean felt like he was cutting a stone or metal. He leaned back and rolled away from the stone pioneer. When he looked up, he suddenly saw a few bloodstains on the stone pioneer's arms and chest, like bleeding stones, which looked very strange. It turns out that you were just SOSO. Dean's eyes were indifferent. What he was most worried about was that the other side had a highly toxic magic mark. This kind of pioneer was the most troublesome. Even if it was a level higher than him, he was not willing to provoke them easily. Even if he could kill the other side, he might be poisoned or even poisoned to death. Among all the types of magic marks, the enemies he was most willing to meet were those who were good at defense. The stone pioneer in front of him was one of them. However, for others, this stone pioneer should be an extremely difficult bone to chew. His sharp blade limbs could even cut metal easily without any hindrance. But when they cut into the opponent's body, they felt a bit of an obscure feeling of friction, which was enough to show that his body was several times harder than metal. For other magic marks that were not good at attacking, this was an unkillable super meat shield. Feeling the tearing pain in his arms and chest, the stoneman showed a trace of shock in his eyes. His anger had long disappeared. He looked at Dean, who was climbing up again, and glanced at his own arms. Although his skin was petrified, he felt that his face must be extremely ugly at this moment. His best advantage was unexpectedly broken like this. Want to escape? A rock family is just SOSO. Dean slowly walked toward him step by step and ridiculed him at the same time. At the same time, he opened his field of vision to the widest, always paying attention to the pioneer in the soil in case of a surprise attack. However, so far, this person seemed to have no plan to make a sneak attack and was still lurking at the place hundreds of meters below his feet. Are you the invaders who attacked the palace? The stoneman's intention to retreat suddenly disappeared. He looked at Dean coldly and said, "Since you know that we are hunting the Rock family, you should know that you are just an outer-level pioneer. If you want to behave atrociously here, you are not good enough." "Is that so? Are there other strong people here?" Dean deliberately asked. The stoneman saw the tentative look in Dean's eyes, which were covered by the carapace. He sneered in his heart and said, "It's too late now." "Indeed, it's too late," Dean murmured in a very low voice. The stone pioneer's heart skipped a beat. Before he had time to think, he saw Dean suddenly coming like a hurricane. His pupils shrank, and he hurriedly swung the stone sword. The sharp blade monster on Dean's back suddenly buckled the ground, pulling his body backward in a weird folding posture, dodging the sweeping stone sword. At the same time, the sharp blade monster on his abdomen fiercely shot toward the pioneer's chest while the stone sword was swung out. Puff! Puff! The sharp blade monster pierced the chest of the stone pioneer, but failed to penetrate it. Dean immediately twisted the sharp blade in front of the strange blade monster. The sharp blade monster slightly expanded from the back, forming a barb hook and buckling the pioneer's body. In this way, it was almost impossible for the pioneer to escape underground. It's too late. Dean pushed the monster limb on his back, pushing his body toward the stoneman. He immediately overturned the stoneman and wrapped the stoneman's arm with the monster limb. In this way, the stone sword in the stoneman's hand was almost useless. Hearing Dean's whisper, the stone pioneer's pupils shrank, and he suddenly fell into despair. He suddenly knew why Dean taunted him. From the beginning, he wanted to get closer to him by talking. If he had escaped the moment he was injured, he believed that the opponent would never be able to catch up with him with his speed. After all, the Rock family was an expert in escaping underground. But he missed the opportunity to escape because of Dean's words. In this second fight, he clearly felt that Dean's strength was not inferior to his. Moreover, Dean's terrifying blade-like limbs were sharper than he had imagined and could easily pierce his body. Chapter 763. Dean stood up and glanced at the pioneer under his feet. The latter had sprinted to about 80 meters underground and seemed to be ready to launch a surprise attack. However, as soon as the Pioneer died, the Pioneer stopped. It seems that there is no inner barren level in the territory of the Rock family. Was the one who tried to assassinate the patriarch of the Rock family? Dean thought of the Pioneer at the peak of outer wilderness level that he killed first. The Pioneer was in the largest building, and his temperament was sophisticated and calm. It was reasonable to say that the Pioneer was a person who had been in a high position for a long time. It was reasonable to say that it was good enough for the Hunter family to send experts to stop the invaders from snatching the god's corpse. There was no need for the patriarch to personally come. After all, the whole family would be shaken if the patriarch had an accident. However, if that person was the clan leader, he was a little too weak. In his impression, the clan leader of the Demon Hunter clan should be an inner barren level expert at least. It seems that although the Devil family has a deep heritage, the resources are not as rich as I imagined. It is the limit to accumulate 1 or 2 inner barren level masters. Dudeen said in his heart. He didn't stay any longer. Since the Pioneer didn't want to come out, he had no choice but to search for the god's marrows and other treasures. 2 hours later, Dean flew out of the messy territory of the Rock family. He calculated the time in his mind. From the moment he invaded the Rock family, it would take about 1.5 to 2 hours even if the Devil family informed the masters in the Padgel Mountains to come back for reinforcements. God's marrows, God's worms, secret techniques. Dean was carrying a huge bag as he flew in the sky. In addition to the expected harvest, he accidentally saw some secrets of the Devil family. Dean saw a strange container in the secret room of the Devil family. It was extremely huge and connected to many pipes. According to the Rock family captives he had captured, it was a devil's instrument to cultivate magic marks. It could store parasitic soul worms for a long time and also had the effect of cultivation. Dean finally understood why all the patriarchs of the Devil family had the same magic marks. The devil's instrument could stimulate parasitic soul worms to multiply and divide, but it needed a large number of mythical worms as food. The cultivation of the Devil family wouldn't be interrupted as long as the family didn't suffer a destructive blow. It meant that the family would always have legendary magic marks to offer to the world and create the strongest. As long as there are no big mistakes in other aspects, the magic marks will last for a long time. Dragon family and Wing family should have such instruments. Unfortunately, the origin of the Devil's instrument is too secret. Most people don't know about it. Dean felt that there was a big secret behind the Devil's instrument. From the structure of the Devil's instrument, not to mention the alloy material, many parts and composition, as well as the infusion tubes and other styles, gave him an extremely advanced feeling. It didn't seem like something that the Monster Research Institute could produce. In particular, this thing didn't appear in recent years, but existed since the beginning of the Devil family. The history of the Devil family was almost the same as the history of the Giant Wall. It should be the weakest era of the Devil family. Humans had just experienced the end of the world. It was not easy for the survivors to survive. It was almost unimaginable to produce such a thing. Moreover, the most contradictory point was that the technology inside the Giant Wall shouldn't be so backward. Unfortunately, the Devil's instrument was too huge. There were many pipes connected to it. If he wanted to move it alone, the time it would take would be doubled. Moreover, the instrument would be damaged in the process of moving it. The gain was not worth the loss. He didn't destroy this thing when he left. It was estimated that this was one of the most important things of the Rock family. Once it was destroyed, it would inevitably anger the Rock family. It would lead to a crazy attack at any cost. In this way, other forces would sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Even if he could repel the Rock family, he would suffer a great loss. After all, he had many tricks and traps. Once exposed, it would be guarded by other people. Moreover, leaving the Devil's instrument behind wouldn't be of any use to the Rock family in a short time. If he succeeded in capturing the Giant Wall, then this thing would fall into his hands. It could be regarded as his own property. I don't know the situation in the Padgel Mountains. After Dean flew out of the territory of the Rock family, he made an arc and turned toward the direction of the Padgel Mountains. In this way, he could avoid bumping into the reinforcements of the Rock family. It had been more than 4 hours since he left. Dean estimated that there should be a fight in the Padgel Mountains. He didn't expect to be able to pick up the leftovers. But the first time he knew the situation of the battle was good for him to make preparations. After flying for less than an hour, Dean suddenly saw a figure running fast on the plain in front of him. The body exuded exuberant heat. It was a pioneer. His heart moved. He glanced at the plain and the distant mountains behind the man. He didn't see anyone accompanying him. He immediately landed and blocked the man's way. "Who are you?" The man had already noticed Dean flying in the air. He slowly slowed down and looked at Dean vigilantly. Dean noticed the tortoise shell-shaped badge on the man's armor. His eyes flashed. This was a pioneer of the Rock family. Most of the pioneers of the Rock family had magic marks that could drill into the ground. He said calmly, "I'm a missionary of the monastery. I was ordered to go to the Padgel Mountains as reinforcements and bring some supplies there. May I ask who you are?" He wanted to pretend to be a member of the Wing family. After all, he had wings, so he could disguise himself better. But considering that he couldn't figure out the relationship between the Rock family and the Wing family in daily life, if he became jealous when they met, he would be exposed. A missionary of the monastery? There was a trace of doubt in the man's eyes. He looked at Dean. His eyes stayed on the huge baggage on Dean's back for a while. Suddenly his face changed, and he said angrily, "You're lying. Who the hell are you?" Dean raised his eyebrows slightly. He noticed the change in the man's expression. He estimated that the baggage was exposed, but he didn't panic. He took out a badge from his arms and threw it to the man. He said, "I'm not lying. It's normal that you haven't seen me. My strength is low, and I usually work in the monastery. This time, I heard that there's a problem in the front line, so I came to deliver supplies. Oh, by the way, there are also some supplies from your Rock family." After that, he put the baggage on the ground and patted it. The man took the badge thrown by Dean and glanced at it. His eyes were full of doubt. This was indeed a badge that only the pioneers of the monastery were qualified to get. It didn't look like a fake. Moreover, the group of invaders were all inner Baron level masters. It would be easy for them to kill him. There was no need to lie. He said, doubtfully, "The supplies from our Rock family? Why haven't I heard of it? It's just been discussed and decided." Dean stretched out his hand and made a gesture to take the badge. This badge was seized from the woman who invaded the temple for the first time. He always brought it with him when he came to the inner wall. He didn't expect that it would come in handy at this moment. He said while walking, "Looking at your route, you should be one of the people who participated in the war in the Padgel Mountains. How could you appear here? Are you?" He looked at him strangely. The meaning in his eyes was obvious. "Did you run away?" "Of course not." The man immediately retorted and handed the badge to Dean. Before he could say anything, Dean's arm suddenly shook. A black liquid gushed out from his arm and turned into a sharp sickle. The sickle was firmly pressed against the man's neck. This sudden change caught the man off guard. He was just an ordinary pioneer, so his body reaction was slower than Dean's, and he was unprepared, so he was immediately held hostage. You're not from the monastery?" The man felt a chill on his neck, his face turned pale, and his voice trembled as he asked. Chapter 764. Dean picked up the bag and flew towards the outer wall at full speed. He didn't even bother to bury the man's body. Dean's face was extremely ugly. The man finally told him about the situation of the Padgel Mountains under his coercion. But the situation was completely different from what he had imagined. The invaders at the bottom of the valley didn't summon the Black Prison. Instead, one of them showed the strength of a Dominator level. That person was temporarily arranged to intercept the reinforcements of the invaders outside the mountains. That person was lucky enough to escape the disaster. He was about to rush back to the clan to pass the news to the clan, but was intercepted by Dean. Dragon Mother and the Rock family were defeated. 2 commanders of the military were beheaded on the spot. There were a total of 7 masters of the inner Baron level when I left, but they were all killed. Dean didn't see it with his own eyes, but he could imagine the scene of a dominator leading 5 masters of the inner Baron level. However, it could be seen that Dragon Mother and the other strongest members of the clan weren't able to reach the dominator level. Who can stop them if the strongest of the inner Baron level is only the inner Baron level? Dean's face turned ugly. He was worried that these people were too weak and could be easily annihilated by Dragon Mother and the others. However, the situation had reversed in an instant. Dragon Mother and the others had become the defeated side. He didn't want to see such a situation. After all, these people had the divine coffin in their hands. Although it was very likely that the method for them to return was that black-robed young man, and the black-robed young man had already been killed by him, so it was very likely that they had lost the ability to return. But it was precisely this that made it even more terrifying. It was tantamount to forcing them into a desperate situation. It wasn't impossible for them to slaughter the entire city if it was extreme. Dean didn't know whether the inner wall had hidden cards or not, but he was burning with anxiety at the moment. He didn't expect that there would be a dominator level hidden among the invaders. Moreover, he didn't expect that there would be a dominator level hidden among the invaders. He could only blame the wrong intel he'd received from the beginning. The enemies weren't 9 inner desolate realm experts, but 1 sovereign and 8 inner desolate realm experts. Moreover, from what he'd seen in the subsequent battles, he hadn't seen any possibility of the enemy hiding a sovereign. Dragon Mother and the others probably didn't expect this either. I have to get Riley to come back. Dean flapped his wings at full speed. He couldn't wait to grow another pair of wings. If it was the previous situation where the 6 inner Baron-level invaders were besieged, then he would be able to break through the encirclement of Dragon Mother and others. Even if a few of them didn't die, they would be heavily injured. At that time, he would be able to negotiate with them with the help of the Temple of Thunder and Utopo Mountain, which was filled with explosives. Even if the negotiations fell through, they could cooperate with the Thunder Shrine and detonate the Divine Mountain. Even if the other party was an inner desolate level expert, they would not be able to get away scot-free. But with the Juggernaut, the situation was completely different. Even if he could use the dead Black-Robe youth as a bargaining chip to fool them so that they could help him wipe out the masters of the inner wall. But in the end, it would be his turn to face the situation. In the previous situation, he estimated that even if they were lucky enough to escape, if they wanted to go back and fight against Dragon Mother and the others, they would only end up in a lose-lose situation. By then, he would be able to reap the benefits without any effort. But now they didn't feel any pressure to kill the Dragon Mother and others. It would be their turn once all the masters of the inner wall were killed. Damn, a Juggernaut. Dean couldn't help but clench his fists and gnash his teeth. This change had completely collapsed his plan. This was the benefit of strength. No matter how good it wasn't as good as real strength. He prayed in his heart that there would be a dominator-level powerhouse in the inner wall. But the situation would become more complicated if that happened. But would be better than the current bad situation. Unless he hit the jackpot and 2 dominator-level powerhouses perished together. Then the rest of the inner Baron-level powerhouses would be seriously injured. But he didn't dare to have the slightest fantasy about that. After all, the possibility of a Juggernaut from the inner wall was very low. Even if there was one, there would be a Juggernaut who would perish together. This was like a battle between 2 hunters. The probability of one dying and the other injured was the highest. It was not a battle between 2 people of the same level that would end in mutual destruction. That was usually something that would only appear in novels. After more than an hour, Dean flew back to the outer wall. He was ready to throw the bag on the giant wall and go directly to find Riley. But as he was about to throw the bag, he suddenly thought that the group of people had already returned to the gathering point outside the giant wall. Wouldn't it be like throwing himself into a trap if he flew over to them? Although he had the black-robed youth as a bargaining chip, but he couldn't guarantee that the black-robed youth was the only way for them to go back. Even if it was the black-robed youth, he couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't kill him in anger. His eyes flickered, and his mind spun rapidly. After a moment, he suddenly cleared up his thoughts, and his vision seemed to jump to a higher level. He could clearly see the situation he was currently facing. It was like he had suddenly found the end of a tangled ball of thread. These people are inner desolate level experts. It means that all of their magic marks are at legendary level. Although I don't know if it's deified or not, every legendary magic mark has a wide range of abilities. For example, my Splitter's magic mark gives me a super eye power like X-ray vision, as well as a wide field of vision. So even if I call Riley back, they may follow the smell or track me by other means. It's too late to eliminate the traces. Dean calmed down. It's not terrible if they come to find me. What's terrible is that they are aware that the person is dead. Moreover, if the negotiation goes, well, then the real problem is how to deal with them. Time is running out. Chapter 765. Cooperate with the inner wall. Noyce was puzzled. Dean didn't bother to explain to him. Send someone to pick a group of smart ones. I know. Noyce felt the urgency in Dean's eyes. He didn't dare to ask more questions and was ready to leave. Dean stopped him. In addition, let Barton, Sergei, and Sherman's son take the equipment and leave the mountain. Except for the normal guards, send the rest to the second base. This includes Hero and the Pioneers. Noyce was surprised. Shift position? Is this place going to become a battlefield? He realized the seriousness of the matter, so he didn't ask any questions. Go. Yes. Dean opened the bag after Noyce left. He took out the secret techniques of the Rock Clan. He couldn't help but sigh. The time was too short. He didn't have the time to learn the techniques. If he could stop the world for a month, then all the problems would be solved. However, it would be better to kill all of them instead of waiting for a month. Dean smiled bitterly in his heart. He took out the god's marrows and injected them into his body. He injected 6 god's marrows into his body. His body heated up and reached saturation point. However, he was still far from the breakthrough. After all, he had plundered god's marrows several times and had just stepped into the pioneer level. Even if he had enough god's marrows every day, it would take half a month to reach the peak of the outer wilderness. As for the breakthrough to the inner wilderness, it would take more god's marrows and longer time. I have to get through this crisis first. The invaders will go to the gathering point of the outer wall after they take the god's coffin. They will meet Riley and then follow the clues to find this place. Dean leaned on the chair as he waited for his body to digest the god's marrow. If they find this place, then it means that the black-robed youth is hiding something important from them. They can use this as a threat. I can use the explosion of the mountain to buy time to escape, even if I can't. But the hope of escaping from the hands of the ruler is slim. Dean felt annoyed. This was a huge crisis. It was bigger than the crisis of the inner wall. Whether he could survive or not depended on the importance of the black-robed youth to the invaders. He would die if the youth wasn't as important as he thought. In his current situation, he was already exposed to the invaders, so he could only take a gamble with them. He had to make several preparations to prepare for the outcome of the gamble. As for the failure of the gamble, there was no need to say anything. The inner wall won't miss out on Aisha's battle prowess from the perspective of the importance of the god's coffin. Moreover, Aisha must know the importance of the god's corpse. That's why she took the initiative to help them. The possibility of cooperation between the two sides is very big. But the problem is how to deal with the invaders, even if they cooperate. There's a chance to kill the ruler with my traps and the remaining masters of the inner wall. But the inner wall won't let me go after I kill the ruler. It's best to kill all of them. Dean frowned as he pondered. With the destructive power of his current traps, it was not difficult for him to trap his enemies, but it would be very difficult to kill everyone at once. Based on the last battle, he had a clearer understanding of the power of his traps. He estimated that even if the entire Divine Mountain exploded, it might not be able to kill an inner Baron-level expert, unless they were standing still and at the center of the explosion. But it was almost impossible. In addition to the explosion, the other weapon he had was the electric current. However, with the Divine Palace's voltage, even Hathaway was able to break free last time. Although Hathaway was considered an inner desolate expert, they were facing Dominator ranks this time. Moreover, there were many of them, so if they were distributed to everyone, the effect would be weaker than last time. The power station on the mountain is too weak. The damage should be increased by 1/3 if we use the second base. But it's not enough. Dean rubbed his eyebrows as he felt his head swelling. Whoosh, whoosh. A few silhouettes whizzed past the giant wall. Among them, there were two extremely ferocious silhouettes with wings. They were carrying a silver divine coffin that was over 10 meters long, one in front of the other in the back. In the blink of an eye, they arrived outside the giant wall. The other four quickly moved on the land. After a moment, they rushed to a hillside and stopped. The old man raised his hand and glanced around. His face slightly changed. Little Seven is missing. The people behind him were startled. The graceful woman didn't say anything. Her pupils suddenly turned dark red, as if they were filled with blood. After a moment, her figure suddenly flew out and rushed into a bush. A moment later, she returned with a young man in her hand. She casually tossed the teen to the ground and said to the hunchbacked old man, "Big brother, I don't see Seven or Black Prison, but I see this person sneaking around." The old man's face turned gloomy as he stared at the youth. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" The youth was Riley, who had been arranged by Dean. He looked at the 6 people in front of him. He was frightened. The murderous aura exuded from the other side made him feel a sense of fear. But he had experienced undercover life for a long time. His mind was superior. He courageously stood up and asked in a trembling voice, "Sirs, are you looking for a person wearing a black robe? Have you seen him?" After receiving Seven's news, the old man squinted his eyes. It was as if 2 sharp swords were shooting out of his eyes, shocking one's soul. Riley was relieved as he knew that they were the people Dean was referring to. "My young master said that you have to kill all the masters of the inner wall if you want to know his whereabouts. My young master will let him come to see you after you kill all the masters of the inner wall." Huh? The people next to him raised their eyebrows. Little Seven was kidnapped? Little Seven isn't weak, and he has the protection of Black Prison. Who can kidnap him? I didn't expect there to be at least 2 inner Baron-level powerhouses hidden in the wall. I don't think so. The enemy seems to know the weakness of Black Prison. The elegant girl said. She saw the few of them looking over and pointed at the bushes in front of her. "I can smell Black Prison from here. Moreover, when I captured him, I saw an explosion. The enemy seems to know that Black Prison fears fire and detonated it. He then kidnapped Seven. It seems like he is an expert that is tough to deal with. This person is from the Divine Wall, yet he actually made this kind of request. Could it be that he wants to seize this opportunity to rebel?" Another person said, "Squeak, I think I know who it is." "Who?" "G. Do you remember that there's a high wall inside the God's Wall? It is called the Psi Wall. It isolates a small part of the space called the Outer Wall area. The pioneer we caught said that there has been some riots in the Outer Wall area recently. In my opinion, this person should be the one who created the riots in the Outer Wall area. He wants to use our hands to get rid of the masters of the Inner Wall area and then take over the Inner Wall area." G. Riley was surprised as he heard the man's words. He didn't think that they would guess Dean's identity in the blink of an eye. He didn't know how they would deal with him. He wants to use us as a knife. Humph. The burly man's eyes revealed killing intent. "Let's go directly to the outer wall and kill this person. No, we won't be able to go back if something happens to little Seven." The old man immediately stopped them. This person should be a cruel and merciless person. He is able to fight against so many masters of the inner wall and live to the present. We can't be reckless. Fatty looked at Riley. "Take us to your master's house. We want to see little Seven in person." Riley's heart tightened. He didn't know if Dean would allow him to take these dangerous people to see him. He knew that Dean didn't have so many strong people under his command. Although he didn't know the level of these people, but he knew that they were an extremely terrifying group of people since Dean sent them to kill the powerhouses of the inner wall. "Wait." The graceful woman's eyes suddenly narrowed. She bent down and crouched down. She searched his chest for a moment and found a broken finger. Her complexion immediately changed. This is Squeak. It's little Seven's finger. Damn. "Tell me, What did your master do to little Seven? The burly man lifted Riley's collar with a ferocious expression. Riley was out of breath as he looked at Dudion's face, which was full of killing intent. He caught a message from the reaction of the others. My master didn't take him away. He didn't kill him. This finger is a warning to all of you. I hope you won't be reckless. You just need to help my young master to get rid of the masters of the inner wall. My young master will return little Seven to you. He always keeps his word. Are you threatening me? You're courting death. The burly man was furious. He roared and raised his fist, which whistled through the air. Riley's pupils shrank. His heartbeat almost stopped, but the next moment the fist stopped as it was pulled by another hand. Don't be impulsive. The stooped old man pressed his hand down and stared at Riley coldly. Take us to your master. We want to talk to him face to face. I advise you to be honest and not suffer for nothing. We have 100 ways to make you cry and lead the way for us. Riley's face turned ugly as he heard Dean's words. There was a trace of resentment in his heart. Dean had sent him to sacrifice himself in this mission. Apparently, Dean was ready to sacrifice him. Okay, he promised. Master, you have to take care of yourself. Barton reluctantly said goodbye. Call me if you need anything, Sergei said. Dean watched them go down the mountain. There were many people in the prison car behind them. Hero, Ronan, Scorpion War God, and other pioneers who weren't killed on the spot. They used to stand at the top of the inner wall, but now they were in a dirty prison car. Their bodies were limp, and they didn't have the strength to fight. Some pioneers were leaning on the pillar of the prison car. They were looking at the beautiful scenery outside the hillside. Their eyes were dull, and their mouths were slightly open. It seemed that they were scared out of their wits. Their bodies exuded a strong man's stench, which made people vomit. Behind these prisoner carriages, there was another prisoner carriage shrouded in black cloth. Hathaway was lying naked inside, and beside her were a few thin and weak figures. Their chests were as thin as ribs, clearly visible. Moreover, each of them had some black spots on their bodies, or scars of rotting pus. These were all mutations caused by the excessive radiation in their bodies. Some of them had a distorted face. Half of their mouth was shriveled like a toothless woman. Some of their skin protruded with fine particles. But at the moment these people were hugging each other, they didn't dare to get close to Hathaway. Their bodies were swaying along with the prison car. Hathaway's eyes were full of resentment as she stared at them. Her eyes were full of hatred. Although they knew that the girl couldn't move at the moment, they still didn't dare to get close to her and do blasphemous things. Dean looked at everyone evacuating from the holy mountain. It didn't take long for only the patrolling Knights of Light and some servants who were responsible for cleaning to stay on the mountain. At first, Dean was going to dismiss the servants as they were just ordinary people, but then he thought that it would be easy to be exposed, so he let them stay. He didn't want to cause more losses because of his soft-heartedness. Dean returned to the empty temple. Aisha wasn't by his side at the moment. She was handed over to Sergei and the others to take to the second base. After all, if the enemy were to fight here, it would be difficult to match the ruler even if Aisha was by his side. He didn't want to cause more damage to her body. Time quietly flowed. Dean was sitting in the temple when he felt an unusual wind. His eyes slightly moved as he looked out of the hall. He saw a hurricane pushing open the doors and windows. Several shadows broke in from the outside and landed in the hall. There were 7 of them, including Riley. Dean's eyes narrowed, although he was prepared in his heart, but he couldn't help but feel nervous as he faced 6 people who could easily kill him. But he had experienced the same situation many times, so he calmed down. You are the invaders from outside the giant wall. Can you release my men? The people you want are safe. We can talk about it slowly. Seeing that Dean's first words were concerned about his safety, all kinds of distracting thoughts in Riley's heart disappeared. He felt a burst of shame. He had been looking for various reasons to tell himself that he had not done anything wrong. But at this moment, all those reasons were gone. Only guilt was left. He knew that if he did this, not to mention whether he could survive or not, at least Dean would be in danger because of him. Chapter 766. We want to see Shao Qi. The old man didn't pay attention to Dean's words. Hand him over, or I'll make you die miserably." Dean didn't care about the old man's words. But the old man's accent was different from the common language of the giant wall, but it wasn't difficult to understand. He calmly said, "I said you don't need to worry. Your Shao-Chi is in a very safe place. Of course, if something happens to me, then he may not be safe." "You dare to threaten me?" The old man's eyes flashed with murderous intent. He took a step forward, and a murderous intent rushed towards Dean like a tide. It seemed that as long as Dean said the word no, he would immediately attack. The murderous intent was breathtaking and chilling. But he quickly restored his calmness. "This is my bargaining chip. I hope we can talk peacefully. After all, our goal is the same. My goal is to destroy the inner wall and become the king here. You are from another giant wall. You came here to snatch the god's corpse. The people of the inner wall besieged you and made you lose a lot of people. Since we have the same goal, why don't we sit down and talk?" After he finished speaking, he looked at the stooped elder. This person was clearly their leader, the dominator rank expert. The old man narrowed his eyes as he saw that Dean wasn't scared by him. "Talk to me? Do you think you're worthy? Do you really think that I won't dare to kill you because you have Shao-Chi in your hand? You could take my life at any time." Dean calmly said, "I'm willing to use my life to exchange for your comrade. But I can tell you that if something happens to me, then your comrade Shao-Chi will die. You don't need to think about capturing me to torture me. First of all, I don't know the specific location. Secondly, if I tell you the location, then I will lose my bargaining chip and die, without a doubt. Since that's the case, how could I possibly relent?" He spoke very objectively and clearly. There was no fear in his expression. This was a negotiation where both sides had misgivings, and he was trying to find the initiative. Despicable brat. Big brother, let me kill him. Little Seven was actually captured. How shameful. It's better to let him die. That's right, big brother, kill him. The others immediately called out. Dean was shocked when he heard their words. His blood seemed to gush out a bit of cold air. Was his guess wrong? That black-robed youth was not an important member in their hearts? Thinking of this, he glanced at the lion head beside him and prepared to activate the mechanism of the temple. However, at the next moment, he suddenly felt alarmed. Wait, if they really want to kill me, they don't need to say so much. They could directly attack me. Any one of them could easily kill me. After all, I'm just a pioneer. Additionally, some of them are perceptive pioneers, so they could probably sense my real strength. Could it be that he was trying to trick her? No, they might be asking the leader. After all, the price of doing so is to sacrifice one of their members. His heart was cold again, but he still held a glimmer of hope, waiting for the old man to give a response. Okay, the hunchbacked old man didn't even blink. His gaze was cold as he said, I wanted Seven to stay here just in case, but since he is so useless, he deserves to die. You shall be buried with Seven. I will kill everyone here. After that, he lifted his foot. His footsteps were light, but with each step, the killing intent of his body rose a bit. By the time he reached the stairs in front of Dean, the killing intent had filled the entire temple, making it difficult for people to breathe. Dean's face was slightly pale. Although he had prepared a backup plan, it was still very difficult to escape from the hands of a dominator and 5 inner desolate-level powerhouses. This was a gamble for him, but now he had bet on the wrong person. His heart was beating like crazy. He hadn't felt this kind of crisis for a long time. But this time, he knew that no one could help him, and there was no possibility of a miracle. Even if the Wall Lord suddenly came back and killed all the intruders, he would also be killed in the blink of an eye. He could only rely on himself. He could only fight with everything he had. In that case, let's die together. Dean fiercely gritted his teeth. His face showed a trace of ferociousness. He was forced to a dead end. There was only killing intent and strong hatred left in his heart. He didn't know what he hated. Perhaps it was the invaders in front of him, or perhaps it was the people of the inner wall, or perhaps it was his powerless and weak self, or perhaps it was the fate that didn't care about him. At this moment, killing intent and hatred intertwined. He was ready to fight to the death. Just when he was ready to fight to the death, the stooped old man suddenly stopped. The killing intent in his eyes slowly converged. He deeply looked at Dean. From the previous expression of Dean, the old man knew that the worst situation would appear if he continued to force it. So he could only stop. But in this way, their cards would be exposed in front of Dean. Thinking of this, the killing intent in his heart was restrained. Dean saw that the old man suddenly converged his killing intent. The idea of activating the mechanism immediately stopped. His eyes changed, and he said coldly, "Don't you want to kill me? Why don't you do it? Are you afraid of an ordinary pioneer like me?" The stooped old man coldly said, "Although little Seven is useless, your cheap life is not enough to exchange for him. I will let you live for a few more breaths." Hearing the old man's words, Dean was relieved. It seemed that they deliberately blackmailed him. Fortunately, he didn't surrender, so they failed. And the price of this failure was to expose their trump cards. He had to say that they had a lot of options, but they chose the most risky one. Since their cards were obviously in the hands of others, it was undoubtedly the worst idea to use intimidation to find out the enemy's flaws. No wonder a sovereign and 8 inner desolate realm experts ended up in such a sorry state after fighting over a divine casket. Dean despised their IQ, but he didn't relax his vigilance. After all, this might be the reason why they despised him. If it were other pioneers, they would inevitably be afraid. If it weren't for the fact that he had experienced too many life and death situations, most of them would have surrendered or turned around to escape. "Since you want to talk to me, I hope you can keep your mouth clean. I don't want to talk to a dog." Dean sat back in his seat. At this moment, he had the upper hand. Not only was it a test, but it also strengthened his confidence and power. However, he couldn't push them too far. The stooped old man's eyes narrowed, and a slight killing intent flashed through his eyes. But he still endured it. He moved to the chair next to him and sat down. He said in a cold voice, "You will release little Seven if we kill all the masters in the inner wall." "Yes." Dean nodded. "Well, what if you go back on your words?" The burly man next to him looked at Dean. Dean glanced at him and said, "If I go back on my words, it means that I can't hand over your little Seven. Then what reason do you have not to kill me?" The burly man's face turned red as he heard the rhetorical question. Indeed, if Dean couldn't hand over little Seven, then he would die. No excuse could save his life. "We have to take a look at little Seven to determine his safety," the graceful woman said to Dean. Dean indifferently said, "Impossible. We have spent a lot of effort to catch your little Seven. How can we let you meet him? Wouldn't it be the same as giving my head to you?" The graceful woman was about to open her mouth, but the stooped old man raised his hand to stop her. He stared at Dean. "Aren't you afraid that we will kill all the masters in the inner wall? Then we will pick up little Seven and then kill you?" Dean had expected such a question. "Of course I am afraid. So after I confirm that you have killed all the masters in the inner wall, I will let my people send little Seven to you. I will hide for a period of time. I believe that all of you have come from the other giant wall and don't want to stay in this strange land. After all, if the Wall Lord comes back, then none of you will be able to escape." What a cunning boy, the stooped old man thought. Dean's method was indeed feasible. If he hid, then they might not be able to find him for a while. After all, this was the opponent's home ground, and the geographical environment was familiar. Moreover, the opponent didn't need to hide inside the giant wall, as he could hide in a large area outside the giant wall. It was almost impossible to find Dean in this vast area with their speed. The only way was to wait for him, but it would double the danger for them. In that case, how can we be sure that you will fulfill your promise? The stooped old man stared at Dean. "If you hide and don't return little Seven, then we won't be able to do anything to you." Dean shook his head and sighed. "If I don't return little Seven to you, then wouldn't it be the same as tying you tigers to the same cage as me?" The stooped old man's face changed as he heard this. The graceful woman, the burly man, and the others had a big reaction. Their faces changed on the spot, and they looked at Dean in anger. Dean deliberately spoke vaguely as he didn't directly point out his own guess. But through the reaction of several people, he knew that his guess was right. Little Seven was an important part of their return. Moreover, from his previous words, he had probed that these people didn't come from the kingdom of God, but from the other giant wall. This information was of great significance to him. After all, these were two different natures. If they came from the kingdom of God, then it meant that the giant wall of Sylvia has been secretly suppressed by the kingdom of God. In the future, it would definitely be a place of trouble. It was a good idea to leave as soon as possible. If they came from other giant wall, then there would be a lot of problems and information. But at this moment, there was no need to repeat them one by one. You, the burly man, clenched his fists as he stared at Dean. What did you do to little Seven? What did he say to you? The old man's face was gloomy. He knew that even if Shao-Chi didn't say anything, their performance was enough for Dean to get the answer. In this way, the other side was holding their lifeline. They had almost no advantage in this negotiation. Even if they were powerful and could easily pinch Dean to death like an ant, but at this moment, the other side was the master. He could control the lives of all of them. I have said what I have to say. Dean calmed down. Kill all the masters of the inner wall, and then leave the giant wall. I will return little Seven to you. After all, I want the dominion of the giant wall, and you want the god's coffin. This is a win-win deal. Speaking of this, I'm a bit curious. What do you want a god's coffin for? Can you tell me? In your dreams. The burly man stared at Dean. The stooped old man narrowed his eyes as he stared at Dean. Don't you know the role of God's corpse? What is the role of a corpse? Is it worth for you to come all the way here to snatch it? Dean showed a more interested expression. If you are willing, you might as well tell me about it. Aren't you a member of the devil family? The stooped old man asked. If I was then, I would have been removed a long time ago. Dean asked, so the secret of the god's corpse is only known by the devil family? The stooped old man looked at him for a moment, but didn't say anything. He signaled the fatty to release Riley. If you don't hand over little Seven after I finish my business, then the consequences will be more serious than you can imagine. He spoke in a calm tone, but the killing intent in his voice was chilling. Dean felt the strong, murderous intent hidden in his weather-beaten eyes. He nodded slightly. I won't let you down. I hope you won't let me down. We have talked for so long, but I haven't asked your names yet. I don't need to know your names. The stooped old man turned and left. Well, you're going to die anyway. The burly man sneered as he caught up with the old man. It's interesting that there are traitors who collude with foreign enemies. No longer reluctant to stay, they glanced at Dean with a disdainful expression and turned to leave. Dean quietly looked at their backs as they left the temple. He looked at Riley, informed Noyce of the second base. Tell him to come back and manage the affairs here. I'm going to the inner wall. Chapter 767. Hunchback Old Man and the others flew out of Wu Tuo Mountain and stopped on top of the towering giant wall. Big brother, are we really going to be manipulated by that kid? He is using us as pawns. I'm so angry. The burly man gritted his teeth in anger. The graceful woman glanced at him, then looked at the hunchbacked old man and said, Big brother, this brat probably doesn't know the use of the divine coffin. It seems like he wasn't lying. He wants to use us to remove the obstacles and ascend to the throne himself. What a greedy man. He wouldn't have let us take away the divine coffin so easily if he knew about it. The wall will be destroyed sooner or later without the god's corpse. The fat man scratched his belly and said, But we can't rule out the possibility that he knew about it, but pretended not to know. In this case, he might not let us leave. It might be a trap. Even if we help him get rid of those bastards, he might not give little Seven to us. Without little Seven, we will all die when we cross the barren area. You might be the only one who might survive, but we will all die. Hunchback Old Man narrowed his eyes. He wants to use us? He's overestimating himself. Little Three, you stay here and monitor this person. The 5 of us will go to the inner wall to avenge 9th and 10th brother. The graceful woman sighed. It's a pity that 9th brother is dead. Otherwise, he would be the best person to track us. I'm only good at perception. I'm not as good as 9th brother in disguise. I hope they don't have any perception masters. Did you sense anyone else in the temple earlier? Fatty asked. No. The graceful woman shook her head. He was alone. I sensed Shao-Chi's aura and the smell of his blood. Although it has been eliminated, but Shao-Chi should have fallen into his hands. Moreover, His injuries aren't light. It's difficult for him to capture Shao Qi with his strength. He should be just an errand boy. There must be someone behind him. Fatty pondered for a moment and looked at the old man. Big brother, it would be better for me and third sister to stay here. We can take care of each other. Even if something happens, we can escape. 4 of you should be enough. Big brother, don't fight if there's a ruler-level master. I know. Hunchback old man nodded. You should stay. Big brother, it's not convenient to carry this divine coffin around. Let's abandon the coffin and retrieve the corpse. The graceful woman's gaze landed on the silver divine coffin at the side, and she said, Speaking of which, we haven't seen the protector of this divine wall yet. The stooped old man's eyes flickered, and he nodded in agreement. He walked to the side of the divine casket and searched for a moment before he found a spot. He raised his hand, and with a click, a gust of cold air spread out from the divine casket like frost. The stooped old man's expression suddenly changed. He covered his mouth and retreated, saying, There's poison, disperse. When the others heard this, they hurriedly retreated, but the handsome sixth brother was the closest and couldn't dodge in time. The white frost landed on his face, causing him to cry out in pain. The fatty beside him grabbed him with one hand and threw him dozens of meters away, smashing him onto the ground. The others hurried over and immediately saw that old Six Cheeks had been corroded by an unknown liquid. White smoke was rising from it, and his face had already festered. Moreover, the festered face was still emitting hot bubbles, gurgling like magma. Everyone was shocked, and the fatty hurriedly lifted him up. He pressed his hand on his head and stuffed him into his stomach. After a while, the fatty pushed Old Six out. Old Six Cheeks were already a mess, and his facial features were like melted wax. His skin and flesh were drooping on his face, and he looked so ugly that no one could look at him directly. The fatty gasped for breath, and a trace of pain could be seen on his face as he gritted his teeth. Old Two, are you okay? The stooped old man hurriedly asked. The fatty shook his head slightly and said while clutching his stomach, It's a little severe. I need to rest for a while. These damned bastards, F*CK. The burly man's face was full of anger, and he clenched his fists tightly. The graceful woman looked at the trembling Old Six and asked, Are you feeling better? Old Six's body was trembling in pain, and he couldn't stop trembling. The stooped old man looked at him, and seeing that he was fine, he heaved a sigh of relief. He turned his head to look at the divine casket in the distance, and his expression immediately changed. He saw a swarm of black insects rushing out from the cracks of the divine casket, and they were rapidly spreading toward them. It's a poisonous insect. The graceful woman also noticed, and she hurriedly warned. Let me. The burly man roared, and he swung his broadsword and took the initiative to rush forward. His broadsword swept horizontally, and the poisonous insects on the ground were flung to the bottom of the giant wall, and some of them were smashed to death on the spot. The others immediately rushed forward to help, and in the blink of an eye, the flood of black poisonous insects was quickly swept away, and the ground was littered with the poisonous insects' corpses and dark green blood, which emitted a horrible stench. The stench made people dizzy, but fortunately, they were all physically strong, and they could withstand the poisonous gas as long as they weren't directly infected. The stooped old man lifted his leg, and with a bang, the lid of the divine casket flew off and fell to the ground with a clang. A large amount of white cold air gushed out from inside and spread out. The few people quickly retreated. Among them, the one who liked to shake his shoulders while talking, a pair of huge wings extended from his back, and they looked like terrifying bats. The wings flapped quickly, and the cold fog was blown away, and the bottom of the divine casket was revealed. The stooped old man cautiously approached, and when he looked down, he saw that the divine casket was empty, and there was no corpse of the immortal. His face became gloomy, and his fingers cracked, and his face was filled with a cold, murderous aura. It's fake. The other people also saw the situation inside the divine casket, and they immediately became angry. They had sacrificed 3 people, and Shao-Chi had gone missing. In the end, the divine casket that they had obtained with great difficulty turned out to be a fake. Moreover, the sixth brother had almost lost his life. F***CK. The burly man chopped the ground with his broadsword, and a small cut was left on the giant wall. We actually carried a coffin full of poisonous insects around. If I had known this earlier, I would have opened the divine casket back then. The graceful woman was angry, but also powerless. Originally, she came here with full confidence, and especially after she understood the situation of the divine wall, she became even more confident, but she didn't expect that she would suffer setbacks one after another in the blink of an eye. She suddenly felt very regretful. If she had known this earlier, she would have been more careful. She would have investigated this place for a period of time to ensure that nothing went wrong, and then she would have changed from robbing to stealing. That way, there wouldn't have been any sacrifices, and they would have been able to find the real divine casket and leave safely. Big brother, let's go back and kill them all. The burly man's face was filled with anger, and he said to the stooped old man. The stooped old man's eyes were gloomy, and he stared at the empty divine casket in silence. After a long time, he slowly said, "We need to change our strategy." Chapter 768. Let's see their performance. Temple. Dean answered Riley's question. He got up and put on the splitting armor, which was made from the hardest bones of the great splitter's body. He walked out of the temple. Riley pondered for a moment. Master, won't Noise expose our second base if we let him come over? If they send someone to follow you? Dean looked at him. It's a good idea, but it doesn't matter if the second base is exposed. They won't dare to act rashly if the person they want isn't there. Although the second base was hidden, but he knew that it would be easy for them to find it if they wanted to. Moreover, he was happy to let them know the location. You stay and hand over to Noise. Yes, master. Be careful on the way. The wings on Dean's back stretched out from the gap of the armor. He flapped his wings and flew in the direction of the sign wall. It didn't take long for Dean to arrive at the inner wall. He found the central base of the intelligence network. It was located on the edge of the city under the protection of the Earl. The intelligence personnel immediately recognized him. Master, Dragon Clan and Rock Clan have rejected our invitation. The Wing Clan hasn't received the news yet. After a simple greeting, several people immediately reported to Dudian. Dean slightly raised his eyebrows. Dragon and Rock family have refused? Why? They didn't say why. I know. Dean turned and left the place. He flew out of here and stayed in the King's City. He was surprised that the Dragon family refused. After all, Aisha was the one who invited him. Moreover, Haley was in his hands. Why would the Dragon family refuse to cooperate with him? Did they know about Aisha's situation? Even if they knew, didn't they want to see her? Dean quietly drank a glass of the most expensive amber wine from the pub's owner. He could understand why the Rock family refused to cooperate. After all, their nest was destroyed by him. They wouldn't easily withdraw their forces to guard their nest. After all, the demon instrument was their foundation. Even though it wasn't destroyed this time, they should be scared. Little friend, move. A rude voice interrupted Dean's thoughts. Dudian glanced and saw a burly man. He was ugly, but he wore a big gold bracelet on his wrist. He was wearing a fluffy robe. It seemed that he had a good family background. He frowned and said in a cold voice, "Get lost." Huh, kid, you. The burly man raised his thick eyebrows and stretched out his hand, wanting to scold him. Dean didn't wait for him to continue to be verbose. He slapped the burly man's body. The burly man's body rolled a few times and fell to the ground. Dean took off the gold bracelet from his wrist and threw it on the counter. Wine money. He went out of the tavern. He went to a nearby hotel with the name of a noble and booked a suite. He took out the god's marrow and injected it into his body. He stopped injecting the god's marrow into his body. Time flew by. In the blink of an eye, Dean stayed in the hotel for 2 days. He walked around the city and saw the destroyed palace. The whole palace was in a mess. There were several holes in the middle of the stairs. Although the scene had been surrounded and there were a lot of wall builders repairing it, but it was not difficult to imagine what kind of war had broken out at that time. Dean observed the situation in the palace with thermal vision. He only saw 7 or 8 pioneers. One of them had reached the inner wasteland level. These people were estimated to be most of the remaining forces in the palace. The monastery and the devil family seemed to be fine. What were they doing? Dean frowned. He had been staying in King's City for 2 days. He was always paying attention to the movement in the direction of the palace. At the same time, he spied on various aspects of intelligence. However, the information he got was still about the war in the Padgel Mountains. Moreover, the intelligence didn't mention the defeat of the dragon family and the royal family. The news should have been blocked to avoid panic. Instead, it was said that the invading rebels had been beheaded. These invaders were defined as rebels in the outer wall according to the information they got from various sources. If they attacked the devil family, then even if the devil family didn't have enough time to spread the news, it should have taken such a long time. If the news was leaked, then the other devil families, the monastery, the magistrate, and other forces were bound to gather together to fight against the enemy. But it wasn't like that. Dean's eyes flashed. It was hard to believe that these people had killed all the people from the devil family and the monastery. After all, although the devil family couldn't compete with them, but they had a large number of people. There were 6 of them in total. No matter how fast they killed, it was impossible for them to not spread the news, unless they sneaked in and assassinated them one by one. However, it was also possible that they didn't take action. Dean thought again and decided to observe for another day. On the 3rd day, the situation in the palace was still as usual. Dean didn't want to wait any longer. He returned to the intelligence center and asked about the reply from the Wing family and the magistrate. Master, the Wing family and the magistrate also refused our invitation. But the King's City came to us and said that they are willing to cooperate with us. The intelligence officer said, "The King's City wants to cooperate with us?" Dean was surprised. His biggest enemy was the King's City. After all, the entire giant wall was under the jurisdiction of the royal family. The outer wall that he divided was the territory of the royal family. But now the only one who was willing to cooperate with him was the royal family. Reply to them that if they are willing to cooperate, they can come to Utopia Mountain in the outer wall to find me. Dean said, "They invited you to meet them in the palace." The intelligence officer said. Dean shook his head. "I won't go. Let them come and see me in my territory." "I know, Speaker." Dean left and returned to the outer wall to wait for the arrival of the royal family. At the same time, he had used up the god's marrows. Half a day later, at dusk, Noise came to the temple and said to Dean, "Master, there are 2 people outside who claim to be from the royal family. They want to see you. Let them come up," Dean said. At the same time, he used the heat source to look at the 2 limitless figures on the steps of Wutoa Mountain. Chapter 769. After a while, Noise led 2 middle-aged men into the shrine. They looked at the temple and then at Dean, who was sitting on the Pope's throne. The middle-aged man on the left asked, "Are you the person in charge here?" Dean indifferently asked, "Who are you?" The middle-aged man frowned as he saw Dean's arrogant attitude. "I'm Stanley, the minister of the royal palace. The one next to me is Lord Henry. He is the right-hand man of Her Royal Highness Eureka. We have come to discuss cooperation with you. May I ask where Her Royal Highness Aisha is?" After saying that, he glanced at the other places. "She's resting, so it's inconvenient for her to meet the guests. I'm in charge of everything here." Dean quietly looked at him. He knew that this person should be the main person in charge of the meeting. His official position was higher than Lord Henry, who was next to him. Although the palace minister was equivalent to the imperial minister in ancient China and managed all the things in the royal family. But here the palace minister had a wider range of things, including various levels of communication meetings. The people who served as the palace minister were usually Earl level, which was also a higher level. He put away the contempt in his heart and said, "Her Highness Yulida is very appreciative of Her Highness Aisha's character. You must have heard about the attack of the intruders. I won't repeat it. Now the group of intruders have left the giant wall, but there is a possibility that they are lurking in the dark. So just in case, I hope that Her Highness Aisha can respond to the signs and go to support them the next time they appear. Dean nodded. Of course. But you know that our outer wall is short of resources. Her Royal Highness Aisha needs God's marrows to enhance her strength. Do you have any idea? By the way, who is Her Royal Highness Eureka? Eureka is the only daughter of the ruler of the Giant Wall. She is the princess of the Giant Wall. She is replacing the ruler of the Giant Wall to manage the affairs of the Giant Wall. Stanley smiled. The royal family will naturally provide the god's marrows. I'll send someone to deliver it when I return. That's fine. Dean nodded. Her Highness Eureka should know about our temporary occupation of the outer wall. What does she think about it? Stanley's eyes flashed as he smiled. Her Highness Eureka has investigated the reason. Her Highness said that we can let bygones be bygones if the cooperation goes well. After all, this is an abandoned barbarian land. Her Highness Aisha wants it, so why not give it to her? Dean listened to his tone. Her Royal Highness Yulida's image emerged in his mind. She seemed to be a good person. He said, Your Royal Highness is so generous. We will come to make amends. Stanley smiled faintly and did not comment further. After talking for so long, aren't you going to give us a chair? Henry, who was beside him, reminded him with a displeased expression. Dean looked at him and waved a noise to take a seat. Dean said after both of them sat down, I've heard that the invaders have lost several people. In my opinion, the possibility of them fighting back is very high. I don't know if Her Royal Highness Yulida is prepared. Her Royal Highness is actively preparing. As long as they dare to come, we will catch them off guard. Stanley replied confidently. Dean chuckled in his heart. Most of these words were used to stabilize the morale of the army. The invaders wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow unless they had a dominator. He didn't point it out and continued to talk with them about the royal family. Dean sent them off after half an hour. The conversation went smoothly. Although Henry had a look of disdain in his eyes, Dean didn't care about it. In the face of the big picture, these little people were not worth mentioning unless they did something to interfere with him. It seems that the royal family is already prepared. If that's the case, I don't have to worry anymore. If they can invite me, they should also invite the Witch Clan and the Monster Research Institute. The combat power of the Monster Research Institute is not inferior to a single Witch Clan. Although there aren't many experts in it, the monsters they tamed are not weak. Dean was afraid of the Monster Research Institute. The first time he sneaked into the inner wall, he saw an extremely terrifying monster in the wilderness. It fed on the undeads. In retrospect, most of the monster's strength was at the peak of the outer wasteland. However, it's already been 3 days, yet they still haven't taken any action. It seems like they've learned their lesson from their previous losses. Dean thought. He wasn't worried about the inner wall attacking him in a short time. The longer the delay, the better it would be for him. After all, his power station and saltpeter mines were producing a lot of electricity and fire saltpeter every day. The more time passed, the more savings he would have. The next morning, Dean received 500 bottles of God's marrows from the inner wall. This was beyond his expectation. It wasn't too much, but too little. He had looted thousands of bottles of God's marrows from the Monster Research Institute. It seems that the royal family has sent me away like a beggar. Dean's eyes flashed coldly. He thought that Yulida was a good person, but it seemed that it was wishful thinking. However, his desire for God's marrows wasn't that big. He had a relatively rich reserve of God's marrows after plundering the rocks. It was enough for him to advance to the inner wasteland level. Moreover, Xiao Manson and Poland were producing God's marrows every day, so he didn't need to plunder anymore. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. Dean absorbed God's marrows every day until his body reached saturation. It was almost the same as he expected. His physique had another breakthrough after half a month of continuous absorption. He had evolved from an ordinary pioneer to the peak of the outer wasteland. He was at the same level as the military god. Moreover, the changes brought about by his physique breakthrough was that his devil body was closer to that of a fiendish devil. His transformed appearance was even more sinister and terrifying, and he had fewer and fewer human characteristics. He estimated that when he reached the inner desolate rank or dominator rank, his body's outer appearance would be completely fiendish. He didn't know what form the Abyssal Walker would take after activating the demonic body, but should be very distorted and terrifying. I don't know if I can win against an inner wasteland level expert. Dean was eager to try, but his reason told him that the chances of winning weren't too big. Although he had the magic marks of a splitter, but the magic marks of the inner wasteland powerhouses were legendary magic marks. This was the main limitation of the evolution to the inner wasteland. His advantage over the inner wasteland powerhouses was that he had the difference of deification. Deification would stimulate the new ability of the magic marks and also strengthen the original ability. But the difference between the physique of the peak of the outer wasteland and the inner wasteland was enough to offset the advantage of the magic marks. The only thing left was the combat experience and the on-the-spot reaction of both sides. It was hard to predict who would win or lose. I estimate that I will be promoted to the inner wasteland in a month with the current resources and absorption speed. This is the advantage of having a strong foundation. Dean was looking forward to this peaceful time. Nothing major had happened in the outer and inner wall in the last half a month. The group of invaders seemed to have disappeared, but he knew that they were hiding in the dark. He estimated that they were investigating and understanding the giant wall. They weren't as arrogant as before. This was more dangerous. Fortunately, this danger wouldn't come to his head first. Once there was a change in the inner wall, it meant that they would take action. They would try to get rid of the inner wall and find a way to deal with him. Maybe in the last half a month, they had investigated the location of the second base. They also knew about the process of him seizing the outer wall. If I can smoothly promote to the inner wasteland level before the war breaks out, then I can rely on my deification magic marks ability to fight against the ruler. Dean hoped that the group of invaders would investigate in detail. The longer it dragged on, the better his advantage would be. Moreover, Aisha had suddenly awakened for the 5th time. Maybe it wouldn't be long before she would naturally awaken again. At that time, it would be the 6th awakening. Once she awakened for the 6th time, her combat strength would not be inferior to the ruler. In fact, she would be stronger than the majority of the rulers. If such a thing really happened, then he would have a complete victory. However, he couldn't figure out the natural awakening cycle of Aisha. If he had a microscope, then he could observe the virus fission in his body and calculate it. Time passed, and the giant wall restored its calmness. The military of the inner wall accelerated the speed of the corpses in the cities. The corpses had been completely suppressed by the time Dean had advanced to the outer wasteland level. The inner wall started to restore the cities after the corpses were settled. The refugees were transported back to their respective cities, and order was restored. Everything was like new grass that was growing on a withered prairie. It was tenacious and full of vitality. Dean studied the super chip in addition to absorbing God's marrows every day. He sifted out the extremely effective technological items that could be produced in a short period of time. The atmosphere had become an upright faction in the Temple of Elements of the outer wall. The limelight of the atmosphere had overshadowed the other 9 factions after Barton was appointed as the pontiff. Some mages even called it the new century's invention. With the development of the chi element, it also brought about rapid progress in science and technology. Everything was restless, waiting to flourish. Half a month later, the nuclear haze that shrouded the sky gradually dissipated. The air returned to normal, and the first rain fell after the new year. The black snow season was coming to an end. The rainy season of the new year was coming. I hope that the peace will continue for another half a month. Dean stood in front of the window and smoked. He blew the smoke out of the window and looked at the rain. The distant mountains and St. Mark's Square were shrouded in a blur. He finished the cigarette after a while. He stayed by the window for a while and took a few deep breaths. After dispersing the smoke in his mouth, he returned to the temple's desk. Aisha was sitting quietly on the chair next to him, accompanying him. Dean felt that the calmness at the moment was rare, but he knew that the storm would come and the rain would get heavier. If only I could make the phonograph. Dean looked at Aisha with gentle eyes. His heart was full of regret. If he could make the phonograph, then he would be able to retain her voice. Unfortunately, he was busy with things that could enhance his strength at that time. If it were now, he would rather use 1, or even 10, or even 100 legendary magic to replace a gramophone. But he had missed it. No amount of remedies would be able to bring it back. The heavy rain fell rhythmically on the windows of the temple. It floated over the entire mountain and into the inner wall. The palace that was destroyed had been repaired. Eureka was sitting in the hall. She was wearing a light red robe and holding a scepter. She listened to the general who was next to her. "Your Majesty, more than a month has passed. The group of thieves has long left. What are we waiting for? General Clinton, don't be impatient. After all, Aisha has awakened the 5th time. It will be too difficult for us to recapture the outer wall with our current strength. Yes, let's wait for a while." Several people tried to persuade him. Yulita looked at Clinton and raised her hand to stop him. "I know what you are worried about, but we can't have any more internal friction in the short term. It doesn't matter if Aisha has 5th awakening or not. Even if it is fake, she should have at least 4th awakening. We can only rely on force to make her surrender. This group of invaders made us lose 2 marshals. We have to recuperate for some time." Clinton sighed. "I'm afraid that they're making progress while we are resting. They are in the dark while we are in the light." Eureka shook her head. No need to say more. The heavy rain bathed the palace. In the heavy rain outside the palace, 6 figures in raincoats stood in the corner of a building. Their gazes were cold as they stared at the towering palace. After a while, one of them said, "Big brother, with such heavy rain, they probably won't go out today. Brother, this is a good opportunity." The old man stared at the palace for a moment and nodded. "Let's go." "Good." The others immediately followed. There was excitement in their eyes. Half an hour later, everyone appeared outside a plaza 2 districts away from the palace. This plaza was the altar where the palace worshipped the gods. In the center was a towering stone platform with 2 angel statues on it. In the center was a stone statue that was about 10 meters tall. It was an extremely beautiful woman whose age could not be seen. She looked like a young girl in her 20s, but also a mature woman in her 30s. She wore a strange skirt on her lower body. Everyone who lived in King City knew that this was the well-known goddess of war, Sylvia. Chapter 770. 6 people suddenly jumped out and rushed towards the statue in front of the square. A group of ordinary soldiers was stationed in front of the statue. They wore black raincoats and stood in front of the statue like ghosts in the heavy rain. 6 figures crossed through the curtain of rain and instantly arrived in front of the soldiers. They didn't make any sound as they killed the soldiers. After dealing with the guards, the 6 of them quickly rushed up the altar and pushed down the statue. The statue didn't fall to the ground. Instead, it was tilted in the heavy rain by the fat man. The stooped old man looked at the altar below the statue. Just as he thought, there was a deep, pitch-black hole here that led to the underground. He hesitated because of the loss he had suffered in the palace. But he quickly dispelled the concerns and took the lead to rush down. At the moment, the rain was pouring down on the streets. There were no pedestrians. The doors and windows of the buildings near the square were closed to prevent the rain from seeping into the homes. However, in one of the hotel rooms, although the transparent glass window was closed, the curtains were not drawn. A white-haired old man, who looked to be in his 70s, was sitting by the window with a glass of red wine in his hand. He was quietly sipping it, but his eyes were fixed on the rainstorm outside. To be more precise, his eyes were fixed on the statue in the rainstorm. When the statue of God tilted, the old man's thoughts suddenly jolted, and he woke up. He was stunned for a while before he suddenly stood up from the chair. His eyes widened as he pushed open the window and stretched his head out to look, completely ignoring the rain pouring in from outside. Soon he saw the fat man holding the statue of God, as well as the hunchbacked old man and the others. Intruders? His pupils shrank, and his heart was filled with horror. He hurriedly lifted his leg, preparing to jump out of the window. However, he suddenly thought of something and quickly retracted his leg. He turned around and ran to the other side of the room. His movements were so fast that he knocked over a bottle of expensive red wine that cost at least 1,000 gold coins. He ran to the front of a small cage, and in this cage was a small, pitch-black mouse. It looked no different from an ordinary mouse, but it was not an ordinary mouse. If one looked closely, they would find that there was a ring-shaped outline inside its ears. This was a sound-seeking mouse. It was also one of the favorite messenger pets of the Dark Believers in the Outer Wall. The old man tore the cage and took out the sound-seeking mouse. He took out a small wooden tube from the bottom of a pen holder and hung it in front of the mouse's chest. He patted the mouse's hair and said anxiously, "Go." Once the sound-seeking mouse regained its freedom, it quickly ran away. In the blink of an eye, it jumped out of the crack in the door and disappeared. The old man took a deep breath after releasing the sound-seeking mouse. He turned to the window and took out a black cloth that was hanging behind the chair. There was a black sword wrapped inside. The sword wasn't wide. It was curved like a sword. It had a very capable temperament. Holding the saber, he lifted his leg and stepped on the window, leaping down from the hotel that was more than 10 stories high. 4 or 5 floors below, a couple was making out by the window. They didn't close the curtains. When the man was about to kiss his girlfriend who had her eyes closed, he suddenly saw a figure falling from the window behind her. He immediately screamed in shock. "Second brother, someone is coming." The graceful woman was about to jump into the deep hole under the statue. Suddenly, her eyes moved. She turned to look at the back of the square. There, a black shadow was rapidly approaching. His body exuded an amazing heat. It was not inferior to them. She narrowed her eyes and said, "I didn't expect that there would be a hidden master here. I didn't find him before. Third sister, leave it to me. You defend." The burly man's eyes were full of murderous intent. He pulled out the sword and rushed out. The rainwater surged on the back of the sword. "I'm going too." The sixth brother, whose cheeks had been destroyed, said as he quickly rushed over. He was worried that the battle would fall into a stalemate with his fourth brother alone and cause too much of a commotion. In the blink of an eye, both of them met the old man. The black sword in the old man's hand melted as it rushed out. The old man entered the demonic body state. His whole body was like a humanoid lizard, but his body was like an insect. There was a network of muscle lines. It looked extremely strange. Seeing this strange demonic body, the burly man recognized it at a glance. He growled, "It's their legendary monster, Shadow Hunter. Kill." Old Six made up his mind. Without another word, he entered the demonic body and rushed over. Fighting 1 against 2, the old man fell into a disadvantageous position in the blink of an eye. In fact, just dealing with one person made him feel strenuous. After all, although his magic mark was legendary, the biggest strength of the Shadow Hunter was to lurk and assassinate, not to fight head-on. It was just that the current situation made him unable to lurk and assassinate. He could only jump out to pin them down, hoping to delay the arrival of the reinforcements. Go to hell. The old man's claws were like knives. His originally kind and ordinary face was filled with ferocity. He roared and rushed toward the weaker Old Six. The heavy rain washed down like the sea, covering the figures of the 3 people. In the palace, Yulida was having a meeting with a group of generals and counts. Although the things they were discussing were of no value to her, she had to find a topic to keep these people here. After all, to the forces like the Witcher clan and the Demonic Creature Research Institute, the loss of the god's corpse was a devastating blow. They should not remain calm. The pace of the meeting was very slow. The heavy rain outside made the generals and counts unwilling to end the meeting so early. After all, going out in a rainstorm, even if there was a carriage to pick them up, it was easy to dirty their boots. In this quiet meeting, no one knew how long it had been. Suddenly, a female officer trotted in from the side hall, bypassed the generals in the meeting room, and came in front of Yulida. She turned sideways and handed her a small note. Seeing the anxious expression on her face, Yulida's heart sank slightly, but on the surface, she maintained a calm expression. She glanced at the generals in the room. Some of the generals and counts who were looking at her saw her gaze and immediately looked away as if nothing had happened. They continued to chat with the people beside them, but their eyes would inadvertently sweep over Yulida. Yulida's fingers were very dexterous. She quickly rolled up the note into a ball. When she saw the few words on the note, her eyes widened and she suddenly stood up from her chair. Her face was full of shock and disbelief. This huge commotion immediately caused the whispers in the conference room to stop. Everyone looked at her in shock. Yulida, on the other hand, felt a little lack of oxygen in her brain and a wave of dizziness. After a while, she recovered and immediately shouted, "Immediately gather everyone and head to the altar. The intruders have returned. They want to steal the god's remains under the statue of Sylvia." What? How is this possible? Isn't the god's remains already? The generals and counts present were dumbfounded. They were so shocked that they didn't know what to do. However, Yulida didn't have the time to explain anything to them. She took the lead and rushed out of the palace. Chapter 771. When Yulida arrived at the square, she saw that the towering statue of God had collapsed on the square. The perfect face on the statue was plastered on the muddy water, allowing the dirty rainwater to wash it away. On the altar where the statue had stood, there was a huge hole. She was stunned for a second before she rushed to the altar. She saw that the hole under the altar had been destroyed by someone. There were dents on the periphery of the hole made by swords. She quickly jumped into the hole. Below the hole was a secret chamber made of granite. The area of the secret chamber was not large, and there were no extra items on display. At this moment, it was empty. The last trace of hope in her heart was instantly extinguished. She stood in the secret chamber blankly, as if she had lost her soul. Her eyes were dull. After a long time, she slowly came back to her senses. The corner of her mouth moved slightly. She turned around and silently crawled out of the secret chamber. At this time, she saw the rest of the counts and generals rushing over. However, among them, there were a few noble counts who came in carriages. They were also wearing raincoats, and there were servants holding umbrellas beside them for fear of being splashed by the rain. When she saw the appearance of these people, a bitter smile appeared on her beautiful face. "Your Highness, Your Highness!" One of the generals, who was completely soaked, hurriedly ran over. He opened the umbrella in his hand and covered Yulida's head. He said with concern, "Your Highness, are you all right? What did you mean when you said that the sacred remains have been stolen? Did the group of invaders come here?" As he spoke, he glanced around. When he saw the hole under the altar, his expression changed slightly. He seemed to have thought of something. At this time, the other generals and counts also gathered around. "Your Highness, didn't the group of invaders leave? They're still here? My God, this is too dangerous. Don't they intend to leave?" The earls looked around nervously, fearing that the invaders would suddenly appear. They had heard the inside story of the Pagel Mountains and knew how terrifying this group of invaders was. It was not the case of complete victory and expulsion of the invaders that had been spread by the commoners. Facing the almost interrogative tone of the earls, Yulida indifferently lowered her head. She looked extremely embarrassed at the moment. Her hair was messy and wet from the rain, draping over her cheeks. After a moment of silence, she suddenly thought of something. Her nose gently sniffed, and her expression immediately changed. She quickly pushed through the crowd and rushed into the curtain of rain. Soon, he arrived at the building at the outer edge of the square. There was an alley here, and at the entrance of the alley, there was an old man lying face down. His hair was white, and he was lying face down on the ground. The rainwater under his body was dyed red, and his blood flowed along with the rain into the surrounding sewers. Eurydice's face was pale, and she hurriedly went forward to pick him up, only to find that he had already stopped breathing. His wrinkled face was frighteningly pale, and there was a huge hole in his chest. His heart was missing, and there were a few claw marks on his throat. One of his arms was broken, and his abdomen was torn open, with his intestines hanging below his hip bone. He had died a horrible death, and it was not hard to imagine what kind of terrifying battle he had gone through. Uncle Mick, Yulida hissed in grief. She hugged him and burst into tears. Tears and rainwater mixed together and slid down her face. It was as if the heavens were pitying her. However, she felt that the cold rain was so heartless. After the grief and indignation, only hatred was left in her heart. She slowly returned to the square with the old man's body in her arms. A group of generals and earls came to greet her, looking at her with concern. Some of them noticed the old man in her arms, but they were puzzled. "Your Highness, who is this man? He is the intruder?" Everyone looked puzzled. Yulida remained silent. When she heard someone say that he was the intruder, her expression changed a little. She raised her head and expressionlessly said, "He is the person that my father trusted the most. He has been living here, pretending to be an ordinary lonely old man, and guarding the immortal's corpse. The last time the god's coffin was stolen by the intruder, it was just a smokescreen. The immortal's corpse was not inside, but this time, the immortal's corpse is really gone." Hearing her words, everyone looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. "Your Highness, what you said, is it true?" A general could not help but ask. Yulida looked at him expressionlessly and said, "If we can't get the immortal's corpse back, you will see with your own eyes whether the immortal's corpse is lost or not after a while." The general's expression changed, and he could not help but shiver. "Your Highness, the immortal's corpse is so important. How can it be hidden in a place like the altar? Isn't this nonsense?" A earl in his 50s with white hair on his temples reprimanded in shock and anger. Yulida raised her eyelids and glanced at him. She said, "This was arranged by my father. If you have any objections, you can wait for my father to come back and talk to him. Besides, even if it was arranged under the palace, wasn't it still robbed? Is the defense there weak?" The earl's expression changed slightly, and he was speechless. "Your Highness, other than you, who else knows that the immortal's corpse is hidden here? How did these invaders know about it? Yes, we have been here for so many years, but we did not know that the immortal's corpse was hidden here. How did these intruders find it? There must be a traitor." Hearing their words, Yulida felt a sense of irritation in her heart. One could even say that she was manic. However, she had strong self-control. Her fingers slightly tightened, and she took a deep breath. She said coldly, "Other than me, my father, and Uncle Mick, no one else knows about this. After the fake coffin under the palace was robbed, I never came here. I was worried that they would follow me and track me here, but they still found this place. How is this possible? Could it be that Mick leaked the secret? He died in battle. How could he leak the secret? Let's not talk about the strangeness of this matter for now. Right now, retrieving the immortal's corpse is our top priority. Since it has already been robbed, what's the point of thinking so much? If these intruders return to their territory, we will be completely finished. That's right. Let's think about how to retrieve the immortal's corpse first." Yulida acted as if she did not hear the crowd's discussion. Her gaze slowly shifted to a spot outside the plaza. If one looked closely, there was a faint smell of blood on this path. Although it was covered by the rain, and the smell was extremely faint, it should be the direction that the intruders left in. After a moment of silence, she said, "Inform Dragon Mother, Rock Demon, and King Ea the Hunter family. Tell them about this, and ask them to lead their pioneers to stop the invaders. I'll go ahead and see if I can follow them. I'll leave my scent along the way so that they can follow my scent." "Your Highness, you want to go personally? How can you do that? There are Dominator experts among them." "Your Highness, you should stay here and take charge of the situation," several generals and earls hurriedly advised. Chapter 772. On the giant wall in the heavy rain. 6 figures leaped up and stood on the wide walkway. The burly man and the fat man gently placed a 7 to 8 meter long, oval-shaped metal ball on the ground. The metal ball looked like a mango, flat and round. There were many solidified gray shells on its surface. Under the washing of the rain, pieces of bright silver metal could be seen. There were streamlined metal patterns on the surface of the metal, and it looked very simple. "Big brother, let's inspect the goods," the graceful woman said to the old man. The old man looked around. "The rain is too heavy here. The corpses of the gods will be polluted if we open the coffin. Let's find a clean place first. Then let's go to the outer wall and find a place to settle down. I don't think they will come here. Even if they come, we won't be afraid, as long as we have the corpses of the gods in our hands." All right. They quickly made a decision. They moved the coffin and went along the wall. After a while, they arrived at a village on the outskirts of the outer wall. They sneaked into a farmer's house. The torrential rain poured down and lightning flashed, illuminating the world occasionally. In the spacious living room, the farmer and his wife were lying on the floor, their necks bent at a 90-degree angle. Their 2 daughters, who were studying medicine in the bedroom, were also lying on the table and the floor. Blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. Their necks were also broken, and it was done by the same person. Only the old man and the others were left in the house. They moved the oval metal ball into the farmer's cowshed. The cowshed was large enough to hold the huge metal ball. The cows inside were all killed and piled up in a corner of the cowshed. The 6 of them surrounded the metal ball. The hunchbacked old man reached out to wipe away the dirt on the surface of the metal ball. Soon, he found a gap thinner than a strand of hair on the edge of the metal ball. In addition, there was a raised metal plate in the middle of the gap. The old man frowned. The shape of the coffin was completely different from the fake one they had seized. It didn't look like a coffin at all. The surface of the coffin didn't have the engravings of the goddess of war and the monsters. It was too ordinary and low-key. "Big brother, how do we open this thing? Is it locked?" The burly man and Fatty looked at the strange shape of this thing and didn't know where to start. The stooped old man pondered for a moment and tried to move his palm against the metal plate. However, the metal plate was firmly fixed. Just as he was about to withdraw his hand, the metal ball suddenly trembled, scaring the few of them. After all, they had been injured by the poisonous gas released by the fake last time. They had suffered quite a bit, and it had left a lot of trauma. Just as the hunchbacked old man retracted his palm, a pleasant female voice came from behind the metal plate. The female voice spoke in a language that the 6 of them had never heard before. When they heard this female voice, the 6 of them retreated in fear, their faces filled with horror. The hunchbacked elder was also shocked. He stared at the metal ball in shock. This voice, could it be the goddess of battles inside? Was she not dead? The fatty, the graceful woman, and the others had the same thought. They looked at each other and saw the disbelief in each other's eyes. Remember that the goddess of battles was 300 years old. How could she still be alive? Also, if she was alive, how could she let them kill their way into the wall? The sweet-sounding female voice repeated the strange language from before. Then, with 2 beeps, the metal plate lit up with a red light, and then the voice went silent. The hunchbacked old man waited for more than 10 minutes. Only when the voice stopped did he heave a sigh of relief. However, he discovered that his back was drenched in sweat. He turned to look at the graceful woman and asked, "Is there a living creature inside?" The graceful woman shook her head. When the female voice appeared, she used her ability to sense it. "There is no sign of life. Big brother, didn't the wall lord say that the goddess of battles died a long time ago?" The 6th brother, whose face was ruined, said in a shaky voice. The hunchbacked elder stared at the coffin for a moment and said in a low voice, "Step back a bit." The others heard this and immediately moved back a bit. The hunchbacked elder carefully raised his hand and patted the metal ball a few times, but there was no response. He was a little relieved and said, "It seems that this should be something similar to the phonograph of the wall master. It left her previous voice here. It is not her who spoke." The others heaved a sigh of relief. If this Valkyrie was still alive, she would probably be able to kill them easily with a lift of her finger. How could she allow them to fool around like this? The hunchbacked elder carefully examined the ball. After a moment of consideration, he took out his sword and used it to cut the small gap on the edge of the metal ball. After several failed attempts, the blade finally cut into the gap. He immediately used his strength to pry it up. Crack! The The metal ball made a cracking sound and slightly loosened up. The hunchbacked elder adjusted the blade and used the same method to pry it open in other places. 10 minutes later, the small gap on the outside of the metal ball became half a centimeter wide. The hunchbacked elder melted the sword and entered the demon form. He told the others to step back and then used his demon claw to grab the edge of the metal ball and lifted it up. A gust of cold air came out of the metal ball. The cold air was exactly the same as the fake divine coffin. The hunchbacked elder's pupil shrank as he hurriedly stepped back. Soon, the cold air spread out and gradually spread. The surrounding temperature dropped sharply. Even the heavy rain that fell on the cowshed suddenly became lighter. Because the cold air was absorbed by the top of the cowshed, it condensed into a thick layer of ice crystals. If the 6 people were standing outside the cowshed, they would notice that the rainwater that fell on the cowshed was frozen into ice as soon as it splashed. The temperature in the cowshed quickly dropped below zero. The spread of the cold air became wider and wider, and the rainwater flowing down the edge of the cowshed turned into icicles. The entire cowshed was soon frozen into an ice room, including the dead cows piled up in the corner. All of their bodies stiffened, and the blood that flowed out froze into ice. After a while, when the cold air almost dissipated, the hunchbacked elder tentatively reached out his hand to touch a little bit of the cold air. He only felt that his fingertips were cold, but other than that, he didn't feel any discomfort. He tried again and finally came to the conclusion that the cold air was different from the last time. It wasn't poisonous, but pure cold air. After knowing that the cold air was not poisonous, he immediately rushed into the cowshed. However, just in case, he still held his breath and looked into the oval metal sphere. He saw a faint white gas drifting inside, and in the haze, a perfectly proportioned snow-white naked body was lying inside, as if it was in a deep sleep. When he saw the face of the body, he heaved a sigh of relief. This appearance matched the information he received for the mission. This was Goddess Sylvia. His gaze landed on her body. She was completely naked, with nothing covering her body, including the private parts of her lower body. However, there was not a hint of lust in his eyes. Instead, the more he looked, the more frightened he became. There was no sign of life in this Goddess Sylvia's body. She was undoubtedly a dead person. However, her corpse's skin was more lustrous and tender than a living person's. Logically speaking, after more than 300 years, even if it wasn't rotten, it would at least be a dried corpse. However, Sylvia's corpse was like a living person in a deep sleep. There wasn't a single wrinkle on her skin. This could be explained by the cold air, but there was another point that made him feel incredulous. That was, Sylvia's lower body from the waist down wasn't made up of human legs. Instead, it was a lump of disgusting, grotesque limbs. It was a stark contrast to her perfect upper body. Her upper body was like a god's, but her lower body was like a devil from hell. He stared at her in a daze. Because he was entranced, he stared for a long time. Suddenly, he seemed to see the god's corpse open her eyes. It was a pair of extremely deep and resplendent eyes that seemed to contain the endless starry sky. They were high above, filled with holiness, and yet emotionless, looking down at him. Compared to her cold gaze, her cheeks seemed to reveal a smile. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly. Just this slight expression alone made her extremely dazzling. She was filled with irresistible charm and extremely feminine charm. The group of disgusting, grotesque limbs under her body also seemed to be wriggling slightly, trying to climb out of the metal ball. No! The hunchbacked elder roared and took a few steps back. Everything in front of him suddenly disappeared like an illusion. Everything returned to what he saw before. Sylvia was still lying quietly in the metal ball. Her eyes were closed as if she was in a deep sleep. The horrifying limbs on her lower body also maintained their previous posture and didn't change at all. However, the fantasy-like scene from before lingered in his mind for a long time. His face was pale, and he gasped for breath. He had an urge to immediately escape from this place. Big brother. What's wrong, big brother? The fatty, the graceful woman, and the others heard the sound and rushed in. When they saw the hunchbacked elder's appearance, they were shocked. They saw that he seemed to have experienced an intense battle. In this extremely cold cowshed, he was sweating profusely and gasping for breath. "I'm fine." The hunchbacked elder took a deep breath and slowly calmed his violently beating heart. He still felt palpitations in his heart. He didn't dare to look at the body that was a combination of holiness and evil. He felt that it took a great deal of courage to even stay beside this thing. However, he could be sure that this corpse wasn't fake. It was a genuine god's corpse. This is the war god clan? The structure of her body, how could it be? The graceful woman and the others also noticed Sylvia in the metal ball. When they saw the horrifying structure of her lower body, their expressions instantly changed. The hunchbacked elder took a deep breath and said, "Don't stare too much. This thing is a little evil. No wonder it could suppress the god wall, even after death." "Ah!" The burly man screamed and stepped back a few steps. His legs were trembling and his forehead was full of sweat. His eyes were full of horror. When the hunchbacked old man saw him like this, he knew that he had probably seen the same horrifying fantasy as himself. He stepped forward and pushed the other half of the metal sphere up, covering it. When the sphere covered Sylvia's beautiful face, he seemed to see her eyes open. His heart trembled, and he didn't dare to think too much. He quickly fastened the metal sphere tightly, and in his heart, he even regretted opening this thing. Now that we have the god's corpse, what should we do next? According to the previous plan, the hunchbacked elder gritted his teeth. Eureka quickly climbed the giant wall. She looked at the muddy water left on the wall. She knew that the previous invaders had been here. She looked around, but didn't see any footprints or traces. As for the smell, it had long been washed away by the heavy rain. She wasn't good at tracking smell. Have they escaped from the giant wall? She looked at the vast hunting area in front of her. She could vaguely see some huge monsters crawling in the rain. Her face turned ugly as she clenched her teeth. After a moment, several figures swept over. They were generals. All of them had the strength of pioneers. "Your Majesty, have you found them?" Eureka shook her head. The anger in her eyes had long calmed down. She was silent for a moment. "Immediately gather people and prepare for a comprehensive search. We must find them before they enter the abyss." The generals looked at each other and immediately complied. What a big rain! Dean stood by the window, looking at the cloudy sky. Occasionally, he could hear a few thunders, like the angry roar of the gods. Such a big rain, it should be able to cover the entire range of the giant wall. "Master." Noise came out of the temple and called out. Dean looked at him. "Come in." Noise crossed the threshold and quickly walked into the temple. "The king of the inner wall has sent a letter to summon you and her highness Aisha." Dudian was startled. His eyes lit up, "I know." Noise hesitated for a moment before whispering, "Young master, will they deliberately summon you to deal with you?" "I don't know." Dean shook his head and looked at the sky. "I hope they won't be so stupid." Dean took some battle items with him and left the temple. He went to the inner wall alone. Even if he couldn't beat the master of the inner barren level, he could escape back to the outer wall. After all, the journey wasn't far unless they set up a trap. But even if Aisha went with him, it wouldn't be of any help. Dean arrived at the inner wall after a moment. He did not go straight to the palace, but observed from the periphery for a while. He saw that there were many figures with strong heat energy gathered inside. Among them, there were 4 inner barren level heat energy figures, and he knew all 4 of them. He had seen them during the battle at the Pagel Mountains. They were from the 3 hunter families. Chapter 773. Who are you? Stop. The guard at the bottom of the palace stopped Dean and shouted, "Her Highness Yulida has invited me here. Please inform her." Dean's attitude was humble and polite. The guard looked at him up and down and said, "Please tell me your name." "Dean, you wait here. I'll go inform her." The guard's attitude was not so polite. There was a sense of superiority in his eyes. After a moment, the guard returned. His attitude was obviously much more respectful. His waist was also hunched. "Mr. Dean, please." Thousands of steps made the palace look like a divine palace. It was solemn and dignified. When Dean came to the front of the palace, he saw many extraordinary figures gathered in the hall from the open door. Some of them were people he knew, including one or two pioneers who served as elders of Dragon Clan. With the strength of pioneers, these two elders were fully qualified to sit in the palace. But at this moment, they were standing. There were not many chairs in the huge palace. Only 4 or 5 people were sitting. Among them, sitting in front of the dragons, was a graceful and elegant lady in a gorgeous robe. Her eyebrows were faintly similar to Aisha and Hathaway. However, she had a more mature and charming charm than the two. However, this charming flavor seemed a bit cold under her indifferent expression. It made people unable to raise their thoughts of blasphemy. When Dean came to the door, someone had noticed him and turned to look at him. Yulida was sitting on the throne at the top of the hall. She was holding a scepter and wearing a crown. Her face was dignified at the moment. Her heroic eyebrows gave people an inviolable feeling. Although she was young, her momentum was not weak. She looked down and saw Dean outside the hall. She immediately got up and waved to Dean. Dean calmly stepped in the hall. His eyes swept across the faces of the people sitting in the hall. Most of the people who were looking at him were a bit curious and had bad intentions. Among them, there were obvious hatred in their eyes. Dean knew that they had recognized his identity, but he did not care. "Your Highness, this is?" a black-robed old man from the monastery asked. Dean looked at him and narrowed his eyes. He had seen this person before. He knew the other party, and the other party also knew him. He was the one who had secretly captured him and brought him to the monastery. Dean sneered. "Elder, how long has it been since we last met? Don't you recognize me?" Mo Glang's face darkened, and he said coldly, "When did I know you? It seems that you are old and forgetful. I didn't expect your monastery to be so short of people. You have a forgetful old man fighting in the front line." Dean didn't seem to be afraid of offending people. "You." Mo Glang was furious and took a step forward. The burly Dean, who was sitting in the chair in front of him, raised his hand to stop him. "Are you the one who used despicable means to take away the outer wall and try to take it for yourself? You really are as arrogant and ignorant as the rumors say." Everyone, suddenly a loud and clear voice echoed out. "Don't forget why we are here today. Mr. Dean was invited by me. I can let bygones be bygones as long as Mr. Dean is willing to join us. I hope that everyone will keep in mind that the god's corpse has been stolen. Do you need me to repeat the serious consequences of this matter?" Eureka was the one who spoke. Everyone looked at her and then at Dean, but didn't say anything. Mo Glang didn't intend to let Dean go. "Your Highness, you let such a person join our team to fight against the invaders. What if he stabs us in the back? This kid is very insidious. He could do anything. I think the Dragon Clan has a deep understanding of this point." Dean squinted at him. "Didn't you say that you don't know me? How do you know that I'm insidious? Do you people from a monastery like to slander people? If that's all you have, then I really feel sorry for you and all the civilians. Oh, I forgot. You're an elder of the punishment department. You're only in charge of brainless things like fighting and killing, so it's understandable that you're forgetful." You. Mo Glang was so angry that he couldn't speak. "Don't involve the Dragon Clan in whatever you want to do. I'm not familiar with you." The elegant lady who was sitting on the chair looked at Dean. She retracted her gaze and said indifferently. Mo Glang's face changed. If it was just Dean, then it would be okay. But the attitude of the Dragon Clan was different. Did the Dragon Clan reconcile with Dean? Dean looked at the Dragon Mother. He was surprised, but didn't think much about it. In any case, the Dragon Clan's way of dealing with Aisha had disappointed him. It was unforgivable. It was also the first time for Yulida to see Dean. She didn't expect that the person who had stirred up the outer wall would be around the same age as her. She was surprised, but also curious. Dean's performance gave her a headache. He liked to stir up trouble. It was hard to appease him. She changed the topic. "Today we have gathered here. I hope that everyone can put down the hatred in the past. Now that the enemy is in front of us, we should unite against the common enemy. In any case, The first goal is to recapture the god's corpse. Yes. Dean nodded in agreement. The others who wanted to speak in favor of Eureka didn't speak as they saw Dean seconding the motion. Dean didn't care about their eyes. He looked at Eureka. Your Highness, can you let me sit down and talk? The people who were prejudiced against Dean were angry. Mo Glang sneered. You want to sit down? Do you know who is sitting here? Who are you? You're just a lowly person from the outer wall. It seemed that he realized that his words were too much. Although he thought that it was a bit inappropriate to say it out loud, so he immediately stopped. Dean looked at him, but didn't say anything. He looked up at Eureka. Eureka felt a headache. Dean was really good at stirring up trouble for her. He asked for a seat as soon as he came up. The people who were sitting in the hall were the highest leaders of the various forces. If she let Dean sit, then it was tantamount to looking down on the others. If she didn't, then she was worried that she would anger Dean. After all, the god's corpse had been stolen. With the help of Aisha, who had awakened 5 times, the chances of recapture the god's corpse would greatly increase. She hesitated for a moment and said, "All right, sit with Mr. Dean." There was a commotion in the hall. There was some dissatisfaction. "Mr. Dean, why didn't Her Highness Aisha come?" Eureka immediately pointed out Aisha's name. She wanted to tell the others that Dean was here for her sake. "I'll handle this small matter. She's resting at home." "Resting? Don't let her rest when she's going to fight." Mo Glang sneered. He didn't miss any opportunity to attack Dean. Dean didn't look at him again as if he didn't hear anything. His disregard made Mo Glang's sneer turn gloomy. Soon, the seats were moved and Dean naturally sat down. Dragon Mother, Abbott, and others were calm. They knew that Yulida valued Aisha behind Dean. That's why she gave him a seat. Therefore, she didn't want to lower herself to Dean's level. "Your Majesty, can we discuss business now?" the burly man asked. He was the previous patriarch of the Rock family. His nickname was Rock Devil. Eureka nodded. "It's been a month since the Pagar Mountains. I thought that the intruders had left after they took the fake coffin. I didn't expect them to lurk here. They should have found that there was no god's corpse in the coffin when they left. So they are waiting for an opportunity. Their plan is very thorough, and they caught us off guard. Now they have stolen the real god's corpse. I saw the traces left by them on the giant wall. I guess they have left the giant wall, but there is still a long way to go from the giant wall to the abyss area. They should take a rest. This is our chance to catch up with them." "Your Majesty." The rock demon's eyes were like torches as he said, "Last time, I asked you if the immortal's corpse was real. You said it was. This time, you said it was real. I want to know if it is real or not." Eureka had expected that they would ask such a question. She looked at Rock Devil and said, "This time it is real. I didn't mean to deceive you last time. The fake coffin was my father's idea. He was worried that other people would come and steal the god's corpse. So he hid the real god's corpse under the altar and the fake one under the palace. I believe that all of you know that the immortal's remains are hidden under the palace. It's not hard to find out. But the only people who know that the immortal's remains are under the altar, besides Uncle Mick, who is already dead, are me and my father. The purpose of this is to prevent the intruders from sneaking into the palace. They will learn about the real god's corpse from your mouth. That's why we have strictly blocked the information." The Rock Devil stared at her for a moment and nodded. "I believe it is true this time. But the last time you lied to us, we can't let it go so easily. I will report to the Wall Master and ask him to give us an explanation. Your Majesty, if you didn't lie to us last time, we would have taken advantage of that man's injury to attack them. They would have been dead by now." "Yes." The middle-aged man with aquiline nose who was sitting next to him said in a cold voice, "If we knew that there was no god's corpse in the coffin, then we could have killed all of them. But the result was good. Not only did the god's corpse recover, but he also took them out of the encirclement. Your Majesty, you have harmed all of us this time." Dean noticed that one of the sleeves of the man was empty. There were several new scars and corroded folds on the face and neck of the man. It was estimated that they were caused by the last battle in the Pagar Mountains. Eureka's face turned ugly. She knew that she couldn't absolve herself from the blame, but she also had her own considerations. The reason why she didn't tell them was because she wanted to keep the information about the real god's corpse a secret. She was worried that there were other invaders lurking in the giant wall. Moreover, at that time, she didn't know that there was a Dominator-level powerhouse among the 6 invaders. After that Dominator rushed out of the palace, he didn't make a single move, so they mistook him for a master from the inner wilderness. That was why they were caught unprepared and defeated. This matter is over. Now we should think about how to take back the god's corpse. Dragon Mother frowned. Eureka took a deep breath. I am responsible for this matter, but I ask everyone to think about how to get back the god's corpse. I'm afraid that something big will happen before my father comes back if the god's corpse is taken away by them. The area outside the giant wall is vast. If they have the intention to hide, finding them is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Even if we find them, we can't beat them. The monastery's dean sighed. We don't know how many Wings families Bat Voice and Magic Marks pioneers are. If they lead a team to search, there might be a chance. Rock Devil glanced at the hook-nosed middle-aged man. Including me, there are 4 of them. The hook-nosed middle-aged man said calmly. Dean sat on the side and listened to their conversation. He suddenly thought of a possibility. He knew that the intruders wouldn't leave, or they couldn't leave. They must still be lurking around the giant wall. But they weren't in a hurry to make a move. Obviously, they didn't intend to act recklessly like before. Even if they went out to search for these people according to the method discussed by Eureka and the others, it would greatly reduce the defense power inside the giant wall. If they casually destroyed the inside of the giant wall, no one could stop them. They could even ambush outside the giant wall and kill the teams that went out to search for them one by one. Eureka and the others obviously thought of this, but they had to hold on to a glimmer of hope to try and recover. Something big happened before the Wall Lord came back. What could happen without the god's corpse? Dean fell into thought about Eureka's words. It made him quite curious. Instead, he wanted to see what would happen after the god's corpse was stolen. But he had an intuition that it was better not to happen. Otherwise, it would be very bad. These invaders will definitely kill them one by one. From the looks of it now, if I follow the path they discussed, the chances of them being wiped out are very high. This is a good thing for me, but without them as a shield, the next invaders will be more difficult to deal with. I need time to accumulate more electricity and gunpowder. If I can slow down their killing efficiency. Dean's eyes flashed as he lowered his head to think. Chapter 774. Dean's thoughts were interrupted. He didn't need to look to know that the person who spoke was Mo Granon. He didn't have a good idea for the time being, so he naturally wouldn't put forward any suggestions. He said in a cold voice, "My idea is that you should shut your mouth. Don't interrupt the meeting if you don't have a brain. You will only delay everyone's time. Do you understand?" He didn't care about Dean's feelings, especially the last rhetorical question. It was very easy to arouse people's rebellious heart. Mo Granon wanted to make a fool of Dean to retaliate for his previous arrogant attitude. But he didn't expect Dean's temper to be more fiery than he had imagined. It was completely different from the obedient appearance that Dean used to be in front of him. Sure enough, once he gained the upper hand, the heart of a villain would be exposed. But how many gentlemen would be able to endure again and again after gaining the upper hand? Mo Granon was resentful, but he endured. He had realized that provoking Dean at the moment would only bring disgrace to himself. If he was angry, then it would be tantamount to doing as Dean wished and arouse dissatisfaction from others. At the moment, it would make everyone feel disgusted with Dean's attitude. Sometimes not being angry was more lethal than being angry. There was a trace of surprise in Dean's heart when he saw that Mo Granon didn't make a sound. But he soon thought of the others' thoughts. He glanced at the dissatisfied eyes of others. He knew that Mo Granon had succeeded. His face was calm. He no longer wasted his thoughts on this episode. He continued to think about the previous thoughts and fell into contemplation. The best way is to tell them that the invaders haven't left yet, so they can prepare a trap and gather everyone. Then, I'll use Old Seven's life to force them to jump out and fight with them. This will cause more casualties to the invaders, but it'll be difficult to explain this to them. They might even suspect that I'm colluding with the invaders. Now is a sensitive time, and the moment they suspect me, it'll be very disadvantageous for me. People's hearts were complicated. Simple things often couldn't be said in a simple way. Dudian saw that Yulita, Dragon Mother, and others had divided the pursuit team. They had marked the route and map of the pursuit, as well as the main search scope, and so on. The plan was drawn up quickly, and they chose to pursue and search. Dean sighed in his heart. He had to open his mouth. Everyone, I think we can do one thing before trying to pursue and search. He took the initiative to speak. Many people immediately looked over. Eureka frowned and asked, "What is it?" Time was of the essence. She was annoyed to hear even one more word of nonsense. As far as I know, these invaders are not temporary mercenaries. The relationship and friendship between them is not a simple cooperative relationship. They can be called as partners. Dean said, "How do you know?" "So what if you know?" Moglen said as he saw Dean take the initiative to jump out. Dean knew that the relationship between the invaders wasn't shallow. He judged it from the way they addressed each other in the temple. He looked at Yulida. They supported each other in life and death situations. They should have a deep friendship with each other. Several of their brothers were killed by you. At the same time, their mission was to take away our goddess Sylvia. Now that the mission has been completed, they can return at any time. But will they really leave? I don't think it's possible for me or anyone else here to do so. Upon hearing this, Yulida was stunned for a moment before her eyes lit up. Dragon Mother pondered for a short while, then loosened her brows and slightly nodded. The middle-aged man with a hooked nose looked at Dudian. The dissatisfaction in his eyes faded. Indeed, when we were besieging them in the Pagel Mountains, I heard them talking about Big Brother and Third Sister. Their relationship isn't shallow. If it was me, I would have found a safe place to hide the god's corpse and then come back to kill them. That's right. Eureka nodded, her eyes filled with excitement. She wasn't stupid, and she knew that the possibility of this was very high. It should be known that the enemy had been able to hide here for a month and figure out the location of the immortal's corpse. Most likely, the enemy had also figured out the strength of the experts within the wall. Moreover, they didn't have a sovereign realm master overseeing this place. If the enemy knew about this, there was no reason for them not to come back. If that's the case, it's indeed too risky for us to pursue and capture them recklessly. Instead of that, why don't we think of a way to lure them into attacking us first? Eureka quickly thought of a way to set up an ambush. Dean saw that she didn't need to say anything, so he continued to think about his own things. Moglen didn't say anything as he saw that Dudian's proposal was favored by Eureka and the Witcher family. He didn't even look at Dudian. There was no need to continue to test the attitude of the Dragon Clan and Her Highness towards Dudian. Half an hour later, the meeting ended. The torrential rain outside the hall slowly subsided. "Mr. Dean, you came in a hurry, so your clothes are wet. Be careful when you go back." Eureka took the initiative to send Dean off. She handed him a green animal skin umbrella. It was very delicate and sturdy. It was as waterproof as tarpaulin. It exuded a faint fragrance. Dean took the umbrella. "Send someone to inform me if there's anything." "I will," Eureka said with a smile. "I hope the plan goes smoothly." Dean said a word of blessing and turned away. Eureka's eyes flashed as she looked at Dean's back. She was under a lot of pressure before, but Dean's reminder made her come up with a plan. She was a bit curious about Dean. If it wasn't for this unusual time, she would have sent people to check the details of Dean. She always felt that it was incredible that such a person could be born in such a barren place like the Outer Wall. I hope it goes well. Otherwise, I have to take the risk to chase and capture them. She muttered to herself. Dean returned to Utopia Mountain. Now Eureka and the others had made a plan. They were just waiting for the intruders to take the bait. But after a month of lurking and stealing the god's corpse, Dean felt that the intruders were completely different from before. The previous intruders were reckless, but this time they were cautious and thoughtful. He knew that the enemy had put away their contempt and wouldn't easily fall into the trap of Eureka and the others. It seems that the next step is to push. Dean pondered in his heart. However, The invaders did not leave any contact information, so he had no way to find them. Because of this, the invaders dared to delay and only took action after lurking for a month. The first thing they did was to seize the god's corpse instead of killing for Dean. They probably expected that Dean would not be able to contact them, so they did not dare to rashly kill the hostage. It was like a kidnapper who kidnapped someone but couldn't contact the family of the hostage. In this case, the kidnapper wouldn't easily kill the hostage. Dean guessed that most of the intruders were interrupted. Even if he wanted to use this to threaten them, he wouldn't be able to do it. After all, he couldn't find a hostage. Similarly, he didn't dare to kill the hostage. After all, if the hostage died, then the intruders wouldn't be able to kill the hostage for him. In the end, they would have to bear the anger of the intruders. The gains weren't worth the losses. So even though their life was seized, they were still fearless. They lurked for a month and didn't take Dean's transaction seriously. Dean thought for a moment and came up with an idea. He called Noyce and asked him to bring the finger bone of the black-robed teenager. He would gather the military and the nobles loyal to the Holy Church, as well as all the forces of the Dark Church, for an auction. The name of the auction would be the Seventh Brother. Such a name obviously didn't conform to the general rules of the auction. But this event was held by Dean, so everyone listened to him. Even if it didn't conform to the rules, it would be held smoothly. Moreover, it would spread throughout the entire outer wall. Dean believed that the intruders would leave at least 1 or 2 people in the outer wall to monitor his movements. They would also thoroughly investigate his information as well as the hiding place of the Seventh Brother, even though the Seventh Brother was already dead. Soon, the news of the auction organized by the nobles and the big shots spread to thousands of households. In less than half a day, except for the suburbs and small villages, almost all the residents in the other places knew about it. 3 figures appeared on Crow Mountain less than half a day after the auction started. The leader was a stooped old man who was accompanied by a graceful woman and a burly man. As for the other 3 people, they weren't there. Dean's heart moved. The other 3 had stayed to guard the god's corpse. It showed that the location of the god's corpse wasn't outside the outer wall. It shouldn't be far from here. It shouldn't be more than half a day's journey. Brat, what did you do to the Seventh Brother? The burly man took the lead and rushed into the hall. He stared at Dean with anger written all over his face. Duddy and calmly said, "Please sit down." The burly man trembled in anger. The stooped old man sat on the chair next to Dean. "I've seen the finger bone of the Seventh Brother." "What do you mean? Do you want to break the contract?" "It's you who broke the contract," Dean said in a cold voice. "Have you done what I asked you to do after disappearing for a month? Are the masters of the inner wall still alive?" The hunchbacked elder said indifferently, "Killing so many experts isn't an easy task. Furthermore, I don't know if they have a sovereign like me overseeing things. Naturally, I'll have to investigate first. Furthermore, we didn't set a time limit to kill them all. How can that be considered breaking the agreement? But you, I'm wondering whether the Seventh Brother is dead or alive. You must let us see him." "There's no need to talk about meeting him," Dean said in a cold voice. "If you want to see him, then we will perish together. I'll kill the hostage, and you will wait for the wall's master to come back and clean you up." The stooped old man slightly raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect Dean's reaction to be so intense. He suppressed his anger. "I'll give you 3 more days to kill them all." Dean estimated the time that Eureka and the others would have to bear. In fact, the longer they delay the invaders, the better it would be for him. But he was afraid that Eureka and the others wouldn't be able to wait. Their mentality would explode. 3 days? Isn't it too short? The stooped old man frowned. "At most 3 days." Dean's tone was firm. There was no room for discussion. The stooped old man stared at him and said indifferently, "When this matter is resolved, I hope you can let me see a living Seventh Brother. Otherwise, time is of the essence. Hurry up." Dean interrupted the old man's threat. The hunchbacked old man snorted coldly and got up to leave. Just as he reached the door, he suddenly thought of something and said without turning his head, "Next time you want to find us, go to a hotel in the West End called Audiobook." "What? I've bought the hotel." "All right." Duddy knew that Eureka's movements in the inner wall would soon reach their ears after the three of them left. Once the war breaks out, he would be the fisherman who reaps the benefits. Such a lucky thing was planned by him. If there was a slight mistake in the process, then he would die. But now things were in his control. The next thing to consider was whether the masters of the inner wall could resist the attack of the dominator level. "Master, what should we do next?" "Let's sleep and rest," Dean said. After several consecutive days of work, he was already very tired. Before the upcoming battle, he had to adjust his condition. 2 days later, on a cloudy afternoon, a loud sound exploded in the capital of the inner wall. All the residents in Royal City heard this deafening sound. It was like an earthquake. When the explosion occurred, countless troops seemed to be on standby. They surged out from all the streets, like rivers flowing into the sea, and rushed to the same place. The residents of the city were scared as they didn't know what was going on. Dean, who was in the outer wall, got the news that there were 2 changes in the city. The first one was a secret report from his intelligence network, and the second one was a request for reinforcements from the royal family. He immediately put on his armor and called Noise. "The battle has begun. Prepare according to what I said before." "I know, Master." Noise's expression was solemn. He knew that this was the battle that would determine the fate of the city. Dean rushed to the inner wall alone after he finished his task. A few hours later, when he flew outside Royal City, he immediately saw a large number of soldiers gathered on the streets of the city from afar. The residents had all been sent back to their respective houses, and in the sky above the city center, a few figures were fighting fiercely like sparrows. "They're in a deadlock?" Dean was surprised and happy to see this scene. The time difference between the intelligence and the time he rushed over was enough to determine the outcome of the battle. But he didn't expect that when he arrived, the battle was still going on. It was not a one-sided situation like he had imagined. Chapter 775. A few minutes later, Dean came to the central area of King's City. He stopped on the roof of a building. He saw a few ferocious figures fighting in the air. One of them was obviously a bat. His demonized body had a pair of huge bat-like wings. There were white spiral patterns on his body. He looked like a highly poisonous snake. The other one had short wings and a body like a mouse. His head was long and pointed. His whole body was covered with shiny black hair. He couldn't see his facial features. Obviously, one of them was a member of the Winged Demon clan, and the other one was an invader. On the other side of the sky, the two were fighting fiercely. The heat was like the sun hanging in the sky. It was incomparably dazzling. Their demonized bodies were even more terrifying. One of the demonized bodies was a dragon. Dean recognized that it was a female. It should be the mother of the dragon clan's patriarch, Dragon Mother. Her body was more ferocious and huge than Aisha's. Her dragon wings covered the sky. Her whole body was covered with black and red scales. Her body looked like it was burning with flames. From time to time, she would spit out flames. The scene looked very bizarre and detached from reality. However, Dean had come into contact with some monsters that could spit fire and acid. Some mutated creatures could produce high concentrations of fat or phosphorus in their bodies. They could bring fire, corrosion, and other abilities. For these creatures, spitting fire was as simple as spitting saliva for humans. The one fighting against Dragon Mother was a winged lizard-like monster. It looked a bit like a Western dragon from the old era. It wasn't much different from Dragon Mother's dragon form. However, the color of the scales and the shape of the wings were different. Moreover, the monster's abdomen was high and bulging. Moreover, its head was almost completely demonized. At first glance, it was clearly the head of a monster. There wasn't the slightest human characteristics. Only the skin around the ears and eyes revealed a little human skin color. It's hard to tell who's better. Dean recognized that the lizard-like monster's face contour was similar to that of a stooped old man. He felt incredible when he saw that Dragon Mother didn't fall into a disadvantageous position. Could it be that Dragon Mother had been hiding her strength? In fact, she had already reached the Dominator level. No wonder the battle could last for so long. Dean's mood was complex. He turned to look at the battle on the ground. He saw that the buildings were destroyed. The ground was dripping with blood. There were corpses everywhere. Soldiers and civilians were screaming as they were dying. The three intruders formed a golden triangle pattern to resist the attacks from all sides. Not far from them, there was a body lying on the ground. It was a young man with a destroyed cheek. Dean knew that he was one of the invaders. He looked at the other five. One of them had been sacrificed. However, there were a lot of corpses on the ground, but there was only one intruder. The rest were left by the pioneers and ordinary soldiers of the inner wall. Among these corpses, the most eye-catching were two extremely huge monster corpses. One was a huge python that was tens of meters long. Its whole body was covered with pitch-black scales. In addition to the abdomen, the sides and back were full of sharp thorns. The soft abdomen of a normal snake was covered with hardened scales, which were extremely tough. Dean recognized that it wasn't a monster that was given a name, but an extremely terrifying monster called Titan Viper. The thorns on its body were filled with venom. Being pricked was no less than being bitten. Looking at its body size, it was at least level 90. It was comparable to the masters of the inner desolate level. If it was a legendary monster with a level of 90, then its combat power would be even more terrifying. It was several times stronger than a non-named monster. The other monster looked like a giant ape, but there were several 10-meter-long bone spikes protruding from its back. At this moment, it was lying on the ground, a large pool of blood under its body. It was also a non-named monster, but its level was over 100, and its combat strength was terrifying. Dean knew that it should be a monster that had been tamed by the Monster Research Institute. It was impossible for the intruder to bring such a huge monster to the central area of King's City. However, the two monsters were dead. Only one intruder was sacrificed. It showed that Dragon Mother didn't use her full strength. It was likely that the one who killed the monster was the master of the intruder. Dragon Mother didn't show any strength to contend against the master when the coffin was taken away. Either she knew that the coffin was fake, or she didn't have the ability to display such strength at that time. I really can't underestimate these monster families. Dean's eyes flashed. He surveyed his surroundings. Among the corpses on the ground, he quickly found the rock demon from the meeting in the royal palace. This previous chief of the rock tribe was already dead. His chest had been pierced through, and no one had the time to retrieve his corpse. Without the rock demon, there were no inner desolate level masters in the rock family. Dean frowned. The rock demon was a master of the same generation as Dragon Mother. Now it seemed that the rock demon was much weaker than Dragon Mother. At this time, Dean heard a shout. He turned around and saw the only daughter of the Wall Lord, Princess Yulita, was commanding the army and pioneers to attack the three intruders on the ground. She looked anxious. It seemed that she wanted to get rid of the three intruders so that she could support Dragon Mother and Wing family in the sky. However, among the three intruders, the fat one was like a human-shaped monster. Not only did he have a powerful attack force, but he also had extraordinary endurance. No matter how the surrounding pioneers attacked him, he would always rush up to block them at the first moment. It seemed that these pioneers had suffered losses before. They didn't dare to be knocked down by him. The encirclement was in a stalemate. It seems that we can't be united in the face of a disaster. Seeing this, Dean showed a trace of indifference in his eyes. It was easy for an outsider to see that these pioneers who were encircling the intruders didn't have the murderous spirit to face death. If they rushed forward fearlessly, the three intruders wouldn't be able to resist, no matter how strong they were. After all, they were outnumbered. Moreover, there were two marshals from the military and three inner desolate level masters from the monastery. There was no reason that they couldn't kill the three intruders. However, judging from the way they fought, it was a bit like dragonflies skimming the water. They didn't dare to confront them head-on. Among them, the most courageous ones were the pioneers in the armor of the military. They obeyed Yulita's orders completely. On the other hand, the pioneers of the three families of witches and the monastery seemed to be a bit dispirited. When Dean was observing the details of the surroundings, a whistling sound came from the sky. Bang! Dean saw a black shadow falling diagonally and smashing on the ground, destroying a broken building. In the dust, the black shadow rushed out again. It was Dragon Mother. Chapter 776. Dean's eyelids twitched. He was ready to retreat at any time. The reason why he dared to come close to watch the battle was that the battle would last for several hours. Most of the time, it would be a stalemate, and both sides wouldn't have time to take care of him. But at the moment, Dragon Mother was suppressed. It seemed that she was going to lose. If the battle ended in a short period of time, then it would be dangerous for him to stay here. Dragon Mother. Eureka's face changed as she saw Dragon Mother being shot down. She knew that the key to the outcome of the battle was Dragon Mother. She would lose if she lost. The hunchbacked old man swooped down into the cloud of dust. Boom! Boom! The ground shook violently. At the same time, a figure wrapped in dust flew out at an extremely high speed, passing through 7 to 8 buildings. The solid buildings were easily penetrated like pieces of foam paper. Half of a demonic dragon's wings stretched out from the broken building, trembling as it slowly climbed up. It was Dragon Mother. Her wings flapped, and the gravel and dust on her body were blown away. Dean noticed that the faint red light emitted from her scales had weakened. It seemed that only dark scales were left. Moreover, the heat in her body seemed to continue to decline. It had fallen to a level slightly higher than other inner Baron-level powerhouses. Dean's eyes lit up. It seemed that Dragon Mother had used a secret method to temporarily increase her strength. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that a secret method that could temporarily increase one's strength was a treasure. It seemed that if his plan went smoothly and he controlled the inner wall, he would have to thoroughly investigate the secret methods of the dragon family. Although he would have to pay a high price for such a secret method, but it could turn defeat into victory at the critical moment. At this moment, the hunchbacked old man approached Dragon Mother at an incredible speed, not giving her any chance to catch her breath. Dragon Mother retreated step by step, and the battle soon turned into a one-sided suppression. The hunchbacked old man seemed to be full of energy. The longer he fought, the braver he became, while the weaker Dragon Mother became. More and more wounds appeared on her body. After a few minutes, the old man's claws reached out and grabbed Dragon Mother's wings. He twisted and broke them. Dragon Mother frowned in pain. She held the dragon's sword in her hands and stabbed towards the old man. Her moves were exquisite. However, the old man's movements were fast. He released the broken wings and used his claws to hit her wrists. He bypassed the sword and cut her palms. The sword in one of her hands fell to the ground. Dragon Mother took the opportunity to retreat. However, the old man closed in on her. Dean had a strange feeling in his heart when he saw Dragon Mother couldn't turn back. He felt relieved, but also pitiful and sighed. He didn't know why these feelings appeared. Perhaps it was because of her struggling look. It was easy to sympathize with her. After all, human beings were contradictory creatures. It seemed to be an instinct to sympathize with the weak. However, this instinct would eventually be replaced by reason. Seeing that Dragon Mother was in danger, the other pioneers on the land became anxious at once. They attacked Fatty and the graceful woman more fiercely and impatiently. However, impatience inevitably led to carelessness. Although Fatty and the other two experienced a great increase of pressure, the pioneers who attacked fiercely were killed one after another. Eureka's face turned ugly. She jumped down from the tower. Black liquid gushed out of her body and entered the demonic body. She also joined the battle. Dean noticed the battlefield from the corner of his eyes. When he saw Eureka's demonic body, his eyes narrowed. Eureka's demonic body was a bit eye-catching. It was not hideous or ugly. On the contrary, it was extremely simplified. Most of her body was still in the shape of a human. She had white skin and long legs, but her hands and feet had turned into sharp claws. A serpent-like tail grew out of the armor on her buttocks. A pair of hairy ears grew out of her hair. In addition, Her abdomen and thighs were not demonic. They were still in the shape of a human. However, she was extremely fast. In a blink of an eye, she was in front of Fatty and the others. From a heat source, Dean could see that the heat fluctuation in her body was maintained at the peak of the pioneer level in the outer wasteland. However, every time she attacked, the heat burst out like an explosion, instantly reaching the inner wasteland level. It could be seen that she had an extremely precise control over her power. This fighting ability was not inferior to the commander of the military, maybe even stronger. Moreover, her demonic body was not completely demonic. Generally speaking, the more the demonic body was covered, the higher the degree of demonic transformation and the stronger the power. The demonic transformation of an inner wasteland-level powerhouse was more than 80% of the body. Except for the head, all the parts were demonic. As for the ruler, like the stooped old man, even half of his head was demonic. Unless he deliberately controlled the degree of demonic transformation, it would be the same. Since Eureka was participating in the battle, she naturally attacked with all her strength. However, even with all her strength, her body only had such a small amount of demonic transformation. It was really strange. The strangest thing was that Dean had never seen such a shape of demonic transformation. Among the high-level magic marks that he knew, there seemed to be no such shape. With the addition of Yulida, the pressure on Fatty and the other two increased sharply. Soon, the graceful woman, who had the weakest combat power, had her arm injured by Yulida's claws. The other pioneers found a gap and concentrated their attacks on the graceful woman. The stable golden triangle of the three quickly revealed a flaw. It was only a matter of time before it was broken. Dean was secretly awestruck when he saw Eureka's agile and flickering body. He knew from the intelligence that Eureka was not very old, even 2 years younger than him. However, the power she showed at this moment was much stronger than him. It was estimated that she could compete with Haisha. However, it was not surprising. Her father was the Wall Lord, so he had all the resources. Dean suspected that her magic marks were not from the monsters near the giant wall, but from other places, even from the kingdom of God. It was estimated that it was also a legendary magic mark, or even a higher-level magic mark. Just as Eureka led the pioneers of all forces to attack, the situation on the other side suddenly changed dramatically. Most of Dean's attention was still on Dragon Mother's battle. She was unable to resist the attack of the stooped old man. She was forced into the battle circle, and the injuries on her body were increasing. Just when Dean thought that the battle would end in 5 minutes, Dragon Mother suddenly burst out an amazing aura and forced the stooped old man to retreat. The stooped old man didn't seem to expect that she still had such a strong power. After being repelled, he coughed up a mouthful of blood and looked at her in shock. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.